And I have a high degree of confidence that we'll win.
A high degree of confidence there. Let's talk about if you win. Of course, you would take Macy's private. What can you accomplish by taking Macy's private versus keeping it as a public company?
A lot. A lot. As a public company, it's hard to blame existing management for focusing on the quarter, because that's how they're judged. They're judged day to day, their share price changes, their cost of capital changes instantaneously. As a private company, you can focus on long-term prosperity, growth, and a stabilization of this business that's otherwise seemingly headed in a pretty scary direction.
And what info do you still need from Macy's when it comes to your due diligence that you're doing on this company, that you're doing in potentially raising another bid if they do reject this one? What do you still need from Macy's?
Really confirmatory diligence. It's not complicated, but it's a lot of work.
And you've also, of course, as part of this, nominated 9 people to Macy's board. How confident are you that you actually have the votes there to do that?
So, you know, the 9 director nomination is really a function of the board size. They are 14 directors, so to ensure that we are speaking to shareholders directly, and really to ensure that shareholders can exercise their desires, their wants, and see to an effectuated change, we need to nominate 9. So, yeah.
And how is the communication with shareholders happening? Is that you reaching out proactively to shareholders? Are you seeing inbound requests? What's the mix there?
I would say it's a combination. We've not formally submitted any proxy materials, and we're not soliciting votes at this time. But we have received inbounds from shareholders, you know, on an unsolicited basis, and are very happy to speak with anyone. We are a significant shareholder in this company and have very strong views about it.
And let's talk a little bit more about financing here, because that has been one of the questions. Of course, how would you pay for this? And you have also said that you've identified large global institutional financing sources that represent 100% of the capital required to buy the shares in Macy's that we do not already own. Can you give us some detail about who those large global institutional financing sources could be?
Yeah, so they are, like you said, large global money center banks. And the company shouldn't be surprised that there's so much interest in participating in this capitalization. They have a really great asset base. And, you know, hearing some of their responses that it's a tough capital markets environment, it's a tough financing environment, all of that's true. And notwithstanding that, there is robust interest in participating in this privatization.
All right, Gabriel, it's going to be really interesting to watch this one play out. Hope to continue this conversation soon. That, of course, is Gabriel Kahana, the CEO of ArcHouse.
All right, that was our own Katie Greifeld sitting down with Gabriel Kahana. He is the CEO of ArcHouse, and they, along with a partner, are making a bid for Macy's. They raised the bid today by 14%. Looking at Macy's stock today, it's $20.73, up about 1.4% on the day. So again, we'll have to see how Macy's responds. They rebuffed an earlier offer, but it's good to get the thinking of the bidder here. Right now, let's reset everything. We'll get a little bit of a Bloomberg Business Flash with Mr. John Tucker.
Hi, Paul. And Bailey, stocks losing traction with some big-name tech companies pulling down the rest of the market. The common denominator seems to be China at this point. Apple's iPhone problems in China deepening, while advanced micro devices, that has hit a roadblock in selling artificial intelligence to China at this point. And Joe Livornia at SMBC Nikko Security says, you know what, Fed rate cuts are way overdue at this point.
The Fed was going to break something. They did last March with the regional bank crisis. They've taken rates up too far, too fast. Core inflation peaked in September 22. Given the lags, yes, I think the Fed has gone too much, too far.
And we are going to hear from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He delivers the semi-annual testimony to Congress. That begins tomorrow in the House, and then a Senate panel that continues on Thursday. Some of the economic data we got today: growth in the U.S. service sector cooling for the month of February. And remember, services, that's the largest part of the U.S. economy. That was due partly to a decline in employment. Orders in business activity, that actually quickened. Right now, we have the S&P 500 46 points lower. That's down 0.9%, 5,084 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 221 points, and the Nasdaq 100 right now 324 points lower. That's down 1.8%. Two-year yield, that's down 5 basis points, 4.55 right now. The 10-year 7 basis points lower at 4.13. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash, Bailey and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Bailey Lipschultz sitting in for Alex Steele. Alex is on assignment. She'll be back mañana. We are here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, youtube.com, and search Bloomberg Podcast. We're also on Apple CarPlay, Android Radio. So we're kind of all the new distribution media out there. You can find Bloomberg programming. That's a good thing. Looking at this market here, you know, what we were looking for towards November, December is a little bit of improvement in breadth. And Bailey, we saw some of the small cap names, you know, start to perform better. The S&P equal weighted, outperforming, closing the gap with the SPX a little bit. Not so much this year, kind of going back to the big guys kind of leading the parade.
Driving the market, especially on a day like today, S&P down on 0.9%. Laggards, Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Amazon, Tesla, your main stocks that have really driven most of those gains so far year to date. Mag 7, Fab 5, however you want to call it.
Exactly. Brett Schutte joins us. He's the Chief Investment Officer at Northwestern Mutual Wealth Management Company, joining us from that Zoom thing from Milwaukee. Again, pound for pound, Milwaukee, I think, is some of the best portfolio managers anywhere. Brett, what do you make of this market here? Are you one of those folks that are concerned that maybe we don't have better breadth, better representation in the move higher in this market, that it's kind of pretty narrow at the top?
I am concerned about that. You've had a small group of companies actually pushing the market higher. It reminds me a lot of the late 1990s, where you were later in an economic cycle, like I think you are today, and a small group of companies drove the market higher, which eventually, as we all know, kind of unfolded in a way after a recession where they didn't do so well over the next time period and the next cycle. But I think there's still opportunities in those other parts of the market like there were then. And so I think about those names that you mentioned. I think about small cap stocks. I think about mid cap stocks. I think about value stocks. Those stocks still trade at fairly low historical levels, especially relative to their large cap friends, which I think sets them up well in the next economic cycle, which I think unfortunately happens after we have a recession. So I still think one is likely. But I think the downside in those, even in the recession, is pretty low, just given the fact that they haven't participated. They trade at cheap valuations. And I think the opposite side is going to be pretty powerful for those types of names.
And Brent, with those names in mind, are you talking about energy or banks? What are some of the bigger names that you see as better positioned, given, as we were mentioning, the rally broadly for large tech?
So I think of value more as a factor and not necessarily industry by industry or sector by sector. But certainly those are areas that typically have more value type of stocks. I think they will do well. Historically, if you look at every economic cycle, so if I go back to the 1981 economic cycle, the next economic cycle after that has had different market leadership, while whatever drove the last cycle typically doesn't do well. And so if I take you back to late 1990s, you did see, obviously, energy, you saw commodities do well in that next economic cycle, as well as banks. And so I do think it's largely the same type of setup, but I think more broadly as just things that are cheaper versus things that are more expensive right now, which a lot of those names have certainly earned the right to be expensive, and they have good prospects going forward. But much like back then, you wonder how much that is already priced in. I think the answer is quite a bit.
So give us your recession scenario at Northwestern Mutual. How long do you guys think it'll be? How deep you think it'll be? And do you have any sense of kind of timing? Because a lot of folks, we've been talking about this for a while, and we haven't seen anything.
Yeah, I think it's always calling the exact time period of a recession is difficult. I think it's made more difficult by what happened during COVID with all the stimulus, all the excess savings, and the reality that the U.S. economy is not that interest rate sensitive because people and corporations termed out their debt. This is where I think we're at the end of an economic cycle. You look at wages right now. Wages look like they're at the end of an economic cycle. The unemployment rate is low. It's hard to find workers. We have about everything that looks end of the cycle. I think it's hard to time that because you haven't seen that penetrate the U.S. economy as much because that debt has been termed out, has been fixed. The longer the Fed leaves rates higher, as your prior guest, I think on the lead-in said, the greater the chance there is an accident. To me, I put it differently, and I say the greater the chances it works its way into the economy. And you're seeing that happen now as mortgage debt reprices, as credit card debt reprices, as auto loans reprice. and as excess savings wear off. And so I still think one is in the not too far offing. And I think it'll be more mild just because we don't have, large levels of excess like we have in past recessions that were longer. I don't think that necessarily means the market won't fall, especially some of those larger cap names, which I think are priced to perfection. And I don't think perfection is likely in the coming quarters.
Well, that's my next question. If we do get a recession and you look at weakness, NVIDIA, is that one of the stocks that falls? You would assume Apple would be one of the laggards, though they've been underperforming, as have Tesla, which are, I would say, more consumer-facing than the likes of NVIDIA and some of the other high flyers.
I'll broaden it out a bit more and just say that the top 10 names of the S&P 500 in the year thereafter haven't historically done all that well over longer periods of time. And I even take you back to, I think, one of today's Magnificent Seven, Microsoft, which was in the top 10 names back in 1999. Those who unfortunately bought Microsoft in 1999, it took them 17 years to get back to where it was in 1999. And so to me, this kind of takes you back to some common sense things in investing, like not concentrating in any one part of the market and kind of basing your whole financial outcomes in the future on that. Leadership changes. And typically what was in favor in the past economic cycle and kind of drove that economic cycle economically is also in favor in the markets. In the next economic cycle, we typically cure our shortages. And so, I just think it's more likely than not we get different leadership. I think valuation matters over longer periods of time. It's an imperfect timing tool. But I think parts of the market that are cheap right now will do well as we kind of get past this hopefully mild and short recession.
So the Federal Reserve, I guess the question is, when are they going to start cutting? And maybe and to what degree will they cut? We started the year discounting maybe 6 rate cuts this year. Now I think we're down to like 3 or 4 here. How do you think the Fed will execute for the remainder of the year?
I mean, this is another common sense thing. We're in a difficult spot for the Fed. If they cut too soon, they risk the 1966 to 1982 time period. If they cut too late, they risk job losses, which, as we've seen in the past, once job losses start, even if the Fed starts cutting rates, they tend to trend. There is nothing between up 0.5% on the unemployment rate in cycles to being up 1.9%. And so it tends to trend, and I don't think they're going to be able to land an economy that is 168 million labor market and 28 trillion big, exactly with just a little bit of growth, not too much, but not negative. And so right now, the reason why I don't believe there's going to be a soft landing is I don't think inflation pressures are gone. I don't think they'll be gone until you actually see a recession, which has happened at the end of every other economic cycle. And so right now, inflation is still moving back up. We saw that last week in PCE. You saw the distribution of inflation components rising 5% or more, 57%. You see CPI, you see services still too hot. And actually, the median CPI, the median PCE, they're moving in the wrong direction. And so to me, the Fed leaves rates high until they see signs that the labor market is weakening. And by then, it's too late, which I think the good news is because that will kind of take the steam out of inflation altogether, they will be able to cut aggressively on the opposite side of this, but not until they actually see that. And so I don't think rate cuts are likely in the near term. And that's why I still think you're likely to see a recession as they leave rates high enough and that continues to bite in the economy.
Well, a lot of folks would say, given that, and if you look at the real-time data, inflation is in fact whipped and that they should be cutting rates now. What do you think about that argument?
I mean, I take you back to CPI. I invite you to look at CPI services. I invite you to look at the CPI, the Cleveland Fed median CPI, which bottomed in July and is actually moving higher. I invite you to think about wage growth, which is running at 4.3 to 4.8%. Pick your favorite metric, which typically weaves into the end of an economic cycle. I invite you to look at 1-year inflation break-evens, where the bond market is telling you that inflation may be a near-term thing, as well as 2-year break-evens. And so certainly I think people have become a little bit too optimistic on inflation. As a reminder, I thought inflation would come down because it was tied to COVID. It was transitory. And that's what I think carried us through 2023. Unfortunately, I think now inflation is more tied to the economic cycle, where you run out of labor market slack, wages rise, companies eventually try to raise prices. That gets squashed by the Federal Reserve. And eventually, if your wages are going up on your employees, so your expenses are going up, but you can't raise prices, your margins get hit. And that's where you begin letting go employees.
Smart stuff, as always. You bring it every time, Brent. Really appreciate it. This Chicago MBA folks, they're pretty smart. Brent Schrudy joins us here, Chief Investment Officer, Northwestern Mutual Wealth Management Company, joining us on Zoom from Milwaukee. That's a sobering view, or a I don't know, cautious view, I guess. I'm not sure. A reasonable view. I don't know. I guess it depends on your perspective, but he's not just diving in on this momentum trade. Keep buying him.
No, and that's interesting. I mean, we have seen caution really kind of being a tone that's been struck. But again, it's interesting to see what different people who are actually putting money on the line are thinking and looking at, and just given kind of, again, markets churning around near all-time highs. And I know I hit it earlier. You got Bitcoin, at least on an intraday basis, hitting a record. So.
Yeah, Bitcoin. It's now, wait, look at volatility on this thing. It's now down about 0.4%. 67,250. Was at a high of 69,000. A low 65,000 intraday. So a nice $4,000 swing intraday in Bitcoin. Wow, what a story. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom with a look at some of the company stories we're following. For the first time in more than 9 months, Elon Musk is no longer the world's richest person. If you're keeping track of these things, Musk lost his position atop the Bloomberg Billionaires Index to Jeff Bezos after shares in Tesla tumbled over 7% Monday. They're still tumbling today, down right now about 4.75%. Musk now, or at least at the close yesterday, had a net worth of $197.7 billion. At Bezos' fortune, that was just over $200 billion. It's the first time that Bezos, the founder of Amazon, has topped Bloomberg's ranking of the richest people since 2021. And Bailey, you remember Paul had one of these in his basement when he used to be really buff. Bowflex, the maker of adjustable weight dumbbells and other home fitness equipment, they filed for bankruptcy. They're based in Vancouver, Washington. They listed assets of roughly $140 million, liabilities of nearly $126 million. Chapter 11 petition in New Jersey bankruptcy court. Bowflex's CEO Jim Barr said the multiple potential bidders have actually expressed interest in the business, and the firm will take time in Chapter 11 to sell its assets for as much as possible. The company's been exploring its options because of what it calls post-pandemic environment and persistent macroeconomic headwinds. At Saks Fifth Avenue's return area at its Manhattan flagship, shoppers now see a camera and signage highlighting the enhanced video surveillance and a new policy. Customers have to show a photo ID. The company looking at ways to better scrutinize packages sent back to the warehouse. And that is a look at some of the company stories we're following. I'm John Tucker.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets, we have red on the screen. S&P 500 off 0.9%. The NASDAQ off 1.7%. Yields also coming in to 10-year Treasury, yielding 4.13% on the commodities front. WTI crude oil up just slightly, $79 per barrel. The action's been in Bitcoin. It's currently down about 0.4%, 67,200, but it's been as low as 65,000 and as high as 69,000 today. So tons of volatility there in that cryptocurrency. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, Bailey, and John. Today is Super Tuesday, where voters in more than a dozen states and American Samoa will cast their ballots in the primaries. Former President Trump has the momentum for the GOP nomination, but Nikki Haley is hoping for strong showings in many states. Greg Valliere, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments, says this may be the end of the line for Haley.
It's awfully hard to see her staying in. It's a battle, as you know, for delegates, and she's just doing very poorly on delegates. She can claim that 30% of the party likes her and would vote for her, but that is not going to get her the nomination.
Greg Valliere with AGF Investments spoke to Bloomberg. And tonight, listen for Bloomberg's Balance of Power special on Super Tuesday starting at 8 p.m. Wall Street time. The trial for Michigan school shooter Ethan Crumbley's father gets underway today. The 15-year-old shot and killed 4 students at Oxford High School outside Detroit in 2021. His mom was convicted of involuntary manslaughter for failing to address Ethan's mental health. Now it's James Crumbley's turn to face the same charges. Nicole Boulousse's daughter was killed in the shooting. She says she does not understand why Ethan's parents did not do more to intervene in their son's life.
The stuff that he was doing and saying and writing and showing and watching is not just a kid going through a hard time.
During her trial, Jennifer Crumbley testified that her husband was the one in charge of the gun used by Ethan to carry out the attack. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is cracking down on credit card late fees and says it will save Americans $10 billion every year. The banks and credit card companies are against this new rule. The Consumer Bankers Association says in a statement it will actually harm most consumers, not help them. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Bailey, John?
Hey, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Bailey, a story jumped out at me from the Bloomberg terminal here. A growing number of small U.S. colleges are under pressure. That's according to a Bloomberg analysis of the latest federal data that shows more higher education institutions facing enrollment declines and other strains. About 200 schools met at least 3 of the 5 metrics that Bloomberg used to identify rising pressure on nonprofit higher education institutions with less than 5,000 students. It's according to a review of the most up-to-date government data from the U.S. Department of Education. Those factors include high acceptance rates, falling enrollment, and repeated years of operating losses. So 200 schools, that's up from Bloomberg's tally last year, and the most facing pressure in over a decade. That's including, according to a 2022 collection period of the integrated post-secondary education data system. So it just seems like if you're a smaller school, don't have a big endowment, times are tough here.
It's tough out there. And yeah, Fitch Ratings in the story projecting a deteriorating credit environment for higher education. As you mentioned, wage pressures, higher interest rates, uneven recovery in enrollment. That's all according to the rating firm's 2024 outlook. So yeah, if you're a small school, I know you did not go to a small school, fellow ACC. Well, I guess I was Big East when I went to Syracuse, and then we joined the ACC. But it does seem like a lot of these small schools, you're kind of struggling.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues here, and the schools I've been involved at the board level have all enjoyed very large endowments that have really helped these schools. But a lot of schools don't have that, so they really depend more upon tuition. And if enrollment is declining, it's a real challenge because your costs continue to go up. And I think the pandemic probably just exacerbated that trend there a little bit for some of these schools. So, occasionally we see them, tap the municipal bond market to try to shore up their finances. So again, some continued pressure on some of these smaller schools out there. So we'll stay on top of that story. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fats?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
Also, of course, there's some trepidation. We have Jay Powell's testimony coming up, and with whispers that we could see an altered dot plot.
Apple falling after counterpoints at iPhone sales in China tumbled 24% the first 6 weeks of the year. U.S. officials telling Advanced Micro Devices the artificial intelligence chip it tailored for Chinese market is too powerful to sell without a license. Shares of AMD right now, they are down 1.8%. Overall, the S&P 500, 44 points lower. That's down 0.9%. We're at 5,086 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 248 points lower. The NASDAQ 100 right now down 317 points. That's down 1.75%. 10-year yield 7 basis points lower, 414. The 2-year 4 basis points lower. That's at 455. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Bailey and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you so much for that. We appreciate it. Bailey Lipschultz sitting in for Alex Steele. Alex is on assignment today. She'll be back tomorrow. Paul Sweeney, we're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube. So you just head over to YouTube and you search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's how you find us on YouTube. That's pretty straightforward. We're also on Apple CarPlay, Android Radio, so you got that popped up on the big screen in your car. That'll get you there as well. You can get all the news and audio and video for Bloomberg. So it's pretty much everywhere in terms of the technology these days. Again, awake to the tape here today, as John was just reporting. You got the Dow off. I'm going to call the Dow off 245.6%, but really it's in the NASDAQ off 1.7%. Let's check in with Norma Linda. She covers equities for Bloomberg News. She joins us here in our New York City studios. Nora, what are you looking at?
Well, really the story right now, it seems that tech is leading the S&P 500 lower. That is the worst performing sector in the S&P 500 right now. I'm looking at a couple names right now, Tesla, AMD, and Apple, which John talked about a little bit ago. But Tesla, we have those shares falling after disappointing China vehicle shipment figures. And it does seem that read-through is just China when it comes across for the entire tech sector. We've got AMD hitting a roadblock and selling AI chips that are tailored for China. And then Apple, as we know, those iPhone sales in China are falling by a surprising 24%. So the story of today as it pertains to tech is China. And we're seeing these shares falling as we kind of look at that sector more broadly.
And Paul mentioned the NASDAQ 100 down 1.8%. Just going to call out the volume. 100-day average more than 40% higher than it is at this point in time. So that's some real selling pressure.
Yeah.
That's what they call conviction.
Yeah. Nora, you're paying attention to an airliner?
Yes, taking a look at American Airlines this morning. Those shares are down as much as 3.5%. Now, this company is resuming a slide after its first investor day in 7 years. Now, the thing here is that a lot of investors weren't exactly
7 years.
7 years, long time here, but. People aren't really excited about their guidance, but we do have analysts like one over at Citi defending the stock's drop and saying that investors should really take advantage of this dip as a buying opportunity here.
Got 11 buys, 9 holds, and 3 sells. So the street doesn't know what to do with this name.
They don't.
And I guess the analyst day didn't provide any support for this name. The stock's down 3% today, as you mentioned, up about 4% year to date, but down 12% over the past year.
And the big thing with a lot of these airline and cruise lines, debt. You look at it, American on the FAA Go function, $40.6 billion in debt. Market cap's $9 billion. So debt to equity.
See, I look at it as back in the day when I did would lend money, it's cash flow that pays you back. So you maybe look at net debt to EBITDA. So they've got about 35, let's call it 35 billion of net debt and about 6 billion of EBITDA. That's still highly levered for an airline, a cyclical business like the airlines. That's too much. And what we saw, remember, in the beginning of the pandemic, I remember the first few days, the cruise lines just went to the bond market immediately, raising cash, because they said, if this thing's going to last more than 6 months, we're going to need cash desperately.
Need to be prepared.
They didn't know it was going to be a couple of years, but and now they're coming back and refinancing a lot of that. So, but the airline business is just such a tough business.
I know you're a big fan of flying, obviously.
Big fan of flying.
Are you always on a plane?
I used to be back in the day.
Okay.
I'm still living off of those miles, literally off those miles from 20 years ago. But I'm about on a plane Sunday heading out to Salt Lake. So
good.
Hopefully United will be on their best behavior on Sunday. We're going to have Jen Bartashes coming up in just a couple moments on Target. But what's happening with that stock?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a bit earlier, but this company is up as much as 13% for its best day since November. But what's really interesting here that I wanted to point out is that they are launching a membership program.
Nice.
It's supposed to be rivaling efforts of course, Amazon's Prime and Walmart's Walmart Plus, and I believe the project should be called Project Trident. But this company did have fourth quarter profits that beat expectations. And I'm just thinking about Target. Do you guys shop there? I love Target. I feel like it's a good place to get good bang for your buck.
Yeah,
but would you guys buy into that membership?
When we pull into a college town, and I've had 4 kids away at college, and now the last one, you pull in, whether it's State College, Pennsylvania, Boulder, Colorado, San Jose, you go right to the Target. Boom, you get stuff for the room. Sometimes they have like a little section like, here, just buy this package. It's got all the stuff the kids.
All the college stuff you need.
Yeah, Target's there.
I remember when I went to school, it was like everything was Bed Bath & Beyond, and you went there and kind of checked what you wanted, and they were going to deliver it to the store in Syracuse. So, I guess kind of different options.
It works.
Now that they're out of business.
Yeah, they're out of
I've
business.
seen the dorm rooms at Syracuse, and yeah. You really need an upgrade.
Well, it depends what dorm you go to. I mean, I remember when you go on the tour, they take you to Ernie Davis Hall, which is pristine, and you're like, "Oh, this is awesome! I would love to live here." And then you move into your freshman dorm, and you're like, "What the heck? You were selling
this doesn't match."
This beautiful.
I remember going years and years ago, and to see my brother who was going there. It's like maybe I wanted to go there, and he never once attended class. And they were all passed out in his room. They got up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and gave me $20 to go to the liquor store.
It was at the
that
time
was college life.
The time I was there, it was the #1 party school, depending on what ranking you use. It was a good time.
And I see Samantha saying that the Target was the best place to hang after school. I used to love the Starbucks. And didn't they have popcorn, I want to say?
The popcorn
you
and
walk in,
ices
there's
were
popcorn,
what I would get. Yeah,
ices.
Yeah, big fan. That's where I'm spending at Target. Yeah, they have the best popcorn. I will say, next time you go,
Really?
hit the snack bar, get a popcorn.
It's
If you
too
like
good.
ices, get an icy.
And it's a
Good stuff.
Costco hot dog, right? Isn't that the Costco?
And I heard the pizza.
And the pizza.
Yeah, apparently they have a lot going on there.
But they used to do this at Grant's. Remember that department
Yeah,
store?
5
What
and 10.
happened to them? I think
Yeah.
they were
Throwback.
absorbed by, Vornado.
Grants 5 and
So-
10, 5 and dime. All right, Norma Linda, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Norma Linda covers the equities for us. We were talking about Target and looking at that stock. Target TGT is the ticker to load into your Bloomberg terminal, up 11.7% today. So a nice move here. Jen Bartashis joins us. She covers all the retail industries for Bloomberg Intelligence. She is coming to us via Zoom from our offices down in Princeton. Jen, the street likes Target. What did Target say to get the stock up so much today?
Well, first they had a good quarter, but they're also giving an investor update today. And so they've really revealed their plan for growth over the next several years. And that has been resonating well with investors. And it's all about recapturing top line growth, traffic, market share. And they're a little bit more upbeat on where they see the consumer right now.
And when we look at inventory being an issue that was such a big problem for Target back in the pandemic or during the pandemic, it does seem like that's being worked through. Kind of what's your expectation with how Target is handling their inventory ahead of schedule or not ahead of schedule?
Yeah, they've done a major pivot with inventory, and obviously they had huge issues a couple of years ago with markdowns, and they've really been able to right-size inventory. That's shown up where inventory right now is actually lower than it was last year, and yet in-stocks are better than they've been. And so that focus on those retail fundamentals of making sure that you have things in the stores and in stock has really been playing through and driving some of the results that they've seen. And a lot of that stems from inventory. And so right now they're very well positioned going into 2024. And that should hopefully be a tailwind for them for the rest of this fiscal year.
An affinity card, can you explain what's going on there?
Yeah, so they're kind of reimagining their loyalty program. So the baseline was Target Circle, which was free to join. They have 100 million users that have joined it, and that's where you can go in and save different offers, and you get an extra 10% off your paper towels, that week in that brand. What they're doing is they're taking that, they're making it so you don't have to search and save. You get the things automatically when you check out. And if you're a red card holder, for $49 you can get unlimited free delivery, same day free delivery to your house. And they're calling this Target 360. You can also subscribe to just that if you're not a red card holder. Also an introductory price of $49, but it will go up over time, although they didn't say to what. So it's a move where they're trying to get a little bit deeper into consumers' lives, doing more home delivery. There's some additional perks in there where you can access all of what Shipt does, which is their same-day delivery service, and that includes being able to shop at other retailers. So that's kind of the differentiator here with regards to the membership program, that once you have it, you could also have your Target run include something from Costco, for example. So, but it's early days, and we'll see how much appetite consumers have for yet another membership that they have to pay for.
Right. Well, what are your expectations on that? Because I feel like everyone pays for Amazon Prime, and Walmart Plus, I know, has had a strong rollout and has partnerships with different credit cards. Like, what can Target really do to get people to pay another annual fee when it seems like, at least looking at the streaming platforms, they're struggling to maintain users?
It's a great question, and I think that's one of the big questions that we're going to need to see as they really talk about what differentiates this program. Because $49 is cheap, but it is an introductory price, and there are a lot of people out there that do delivery, and so it's when I look at it, I think in order for it to be a successful program, they're going to have to really do something extraordinary that appeals to people to prompt them to pay extra. And historically, Target's formula for success has never been mimicking others. It's been about kind of forging their own path. And I think this is an example where it's going to be very, very important for them to do that. But it's not clear yet how that's going to fold, how that's going to be, realized.
And we had Brent Schutte of Northwestern Mutual earlier on the show talking about a potential recession. How does Target play into a recession? Are they one of the companies that can weather the storm because of their loyalty, or how does that play out just given their typical demographics?
Well, if there is a recession, with their typical demographics, Target's customer base is extremely loyal, but Target's, product mix does skew to more discretionary items. And so whenever there's a pullback in spending, it tends to have an outsized impact on Target versus other big box retailers. Now, Target has been really focused in the last 18 months, especially on value. They've launched some new private label brands that are, meant to be the cheapest option in every category in the store. So they're trying to respond to that. So, they have the breadth of category and they have the loyalty of consumers that they can weather a recession, but it will make it harder for them to get back to that top line growth and that expansion of margin that they're talking about today if we find ourselves in the midst of a recession.
Hey, Jen, how do I differentiate, if I'm a shopper, between Target and Walmart?
It's all about perception, right? When you think about Walmart, it is usually about lowest price. Walmart is an EDLP. Every day you get the lowest possible price. They've got a very big assortment, and and they have some perks with regards to their Walmart Plus program. When people think of Target, they think a little bit more of discovery. They think a little bit more about inspiration versus function, than functionality. And that's where you really see the divergence between those two retailers.
I will say, when I go to Target, I always end up buying more than I want, where if I go to Walmart, I'm kind of in and out. Jen, question off of that comparison, I always talk up the fact that Walmart owns Sam's Club. When you look at the company makeup, how much does that differentiate Walmart versus some of the other peers, just given, as you mentioned, Target potentially partnering with Costco if you're using their membership card?
Yeah, so, obviously, there's a great benefit to Walmart of having both its U.S. Walmart stores as well as the Sam's Club stores, because they really can capture spending by different groups of people and for different shopping reasons. Now, when I talked about Shipt, it's not so much that you get the benefits of a Costco membership, for example. With Target, it's just more that you can have your delivery person pick up purchases from other retailers, which is something that isn't embedded in a Walmart program, for example. But that Target membership fee is going to be competing with your Costco membership fee. It'll be competing with a BJ's membership fee, along with all of your streaming services and everything else out there. So Walmart definitely benefits from the scale of having both the core stores and Sam's Club. But it is a little bit of a different business model than what we're talking about with Target.
Just for what's worth, I put up the comp function, COMP. For the last 5 years, S&P 500's compounded annual growth rate of about 14.6%, so we all did pretty well there. Walmart's right spot on line there, 14.8%. Target a little bit better, just under 20%, so Target outperforming Walmart over the last 5 years a little bit. Jen Bartashis, thanks so much for joining us. Jen is a senior retail analyst there. She has a very long title, but I just call her senior retail analyst. I'm going with that. Bloomberg Intelligence joining us on Zoom from the BI headquarters in Princeton, New Jersey. He's talking about Target, had some good numbers, got their inventory kind of in line here, and the stock's up about 11% today, so good move there. Not so much for the markets overall here. Again, to get the S&P 500 off about 0.8%, the NASDAQ off about 1.7%. So the tech names, which had been the leaders in this market, are leading us on the way down here. The Russell off about 0.8%. Yields pulling in as well, a 10-year in about 6 basis points, 4.15% on your 10-year Treasury. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. A lot of red on the screen right now. You have tech shares weighing on the overall market. Among the biggest drags in the S&P 500, shares of Tesla down today another 5%. This follows disappointing China vehicle shipment figures. Counterpoint Research says iPhone sales in China fell an eye-opening 24% over the first 6 weeks of this year. And Apple shares right now down 2.6%. A best performing stock in the S&P 500, just talked about that. Target, after their earnings report, those shares right now up close to 12%. In the commodity space, gold jumped to an all-time high. This on speculation over the Federal Reserve pivot, and geopolitical risks underpinned the rally in the precious metal. Right now, overall, the S&P 500 43 points lower. That's down 0.8%. We're at 5,088 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 265 points. NASDAQ 100, 294 points lower. That is a decline of 1.6%. As we look at yields right now, the 2-year yield 4 basis points lower. That's at 4.55. The 10-year 7 basis points lower, and that's at 4.14. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Bailey and Paul.
John Tucker. Thank you very much. Bailey Lipschultz, he's sitting in for Alex Steele, who's on assignment today. She'll be back tomorrow. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. I want to talk about global shipping and its impact on the economy, and man, we've got a good guest for that. Chris Williamson joins us, Chief Business Economist for S&P Global Market Intelligence, based in London, but we got him here in the States. Chris, what brings you to the USA? You were at a conference, right?
We did, yeah, down in LA. We got the TPM.
We say out in LA.
I beg your
out
pardon.
in LA. That's how you do it.
Showing
okay.
myself as a foreigner in this land. Yeah. So out in LA, the TPM conference, the big annual shipping conference that the Journal of Commerce, which S&P Global owns, is holding. So fantastic opportunity to speak to the shippers and the shipping companies about what's happening right now in the world and the Red Sea impact.
Boy, let's start right there, because, I mean, Bailey and I have been talking about, just over the last several months, what's happening in the Red Sea and its impact on shipping. On the Bloomberg terminal, we have a function called MapGo, M-A-P, and you can link it and show you where all the container ships are and oil tankers are around the world. I can tell you where they're not. They're not in the Red Sea. They're not in the Suez Canal. Where are we with that whole situation? How's that impacting the economy?
Well, it seems that a lot of the impact's already gone. It's been and gone. Okay. So late December, January was the peak impact, really. Because what you've got to remember here, there's no capacity been taken out of global shipping. It just had a delay. So as one shipping company told me that their clients, when all this hit, they missed 1 week's delivery as everything was rerouted. But now they're getting deliveries every week again. So, yeah, it's costing a little bit more, so a slight inflationary impact, but it's not huge, and the impact has kind of been and gone, it seems. And we saw this with the Global Manufacturing PMI Suppliers Delivery Times Index. Now, that was an index that, during the pandemic, was one of the real worrying signals. It spiked higher, unprecedented levels, pushing prices higher. So that rose again in January for the first time in a year, signaling longer shipping times. But then it fell back in January again. So another sign that this is it's all over, really.
Yep. Yeah, and working through that, were there regions that were more impacted than others, like in terms of U.S., Europe, U.K.?
Indeed, yeah. So when I say it's all over on a global basis. But there are some impacts still. Obviously, in Europe, the U.K. is by far the biggest hit. It's an island, right? So there's lots of research from the pandemic showing islands have always been bigger hit by this sort of disruption. So the UK's got quite severe delays, and that's feeding through to quite a bigger price spike in goods in the UK, and also the Mediterranean countries, because they're fed less by land than the likes of Germany, for example.
Are there goods or industries that are more impacted in terms of looking at the UK? Like, are there products that have faced longer delays or have had kind of greater hurdles or greater inflationary impact?
Yeah, there is, but again, it fits the sort of narrative of what you normally ship. So these are the big expensive goods to move. So they're not moved by air; they're moved by ship. It's the lumber, it's the construction materials, it's lots of big white goods and so forth. So those are the sectors that have been hard hit. But again, I would urge some caution into reading too much into this, because while the UK has been disproportionately hit, and there was quite a significant lengthening of delivery times in the UK and in the likes of Italy and Greece, these are, it's likely to be short-lived. It should fade.
So what did you were with the shippers out in LA this week? What are they seeing in terms of the global economy? Because there's as you well know, there's a lot of folks that are just unsure where this economy is going on a global scale. What are they seeing just from their perspective?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because at this conference is where a lot of people do their deals fixing the prices of shipping for the next year. So everyone seems to fix their rates in the next month or so. And the last 2 years, it's very much been a sort of buyer's market. We've had low shipping volumes because of the manufacturing malaise we've had. We've had 2 years now of virtually no growth in global manufacturing. We had 2 years of falling exports. So this has led to some really quite soft shipping rates. But this year seems to be the first time where things are coming more into balance. So you're seeing some hardening of those shipping rates, and the consumer goods companies in particular, I think, bracing themselves for some tougher negotiations this year.
And was that just a dumb question, in person before? Like in terms of getting back out of COVID, were you in LA last year?
No, I wasn't. No. This is the first time that I've been there. Okay. So no, but it's a fascinating conference.
What are they saying about China? Because that's also in the news again. Just people really concerned about that economy, and so the shippers. I mean, obviously, and Gene Sikora from the Port of Los Angeles we have as a guest all the time, and he's a good read for us on shipping and volume and exports out of China to the rest of the world. What do some of the shippers say about China?
Well, in the most broadest context, really, when you talk about China, very soon the words come to diversification and resilience in the same conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So the focus is very much on diversify your supply chains to ensure that you maintain a constant supply, and the ability to switch suppliers quickly if one country or one shipping route becomes a problem. Then you've got other options where you've already got contracts and relationships in place. And obviously China's really at the forefront of that diversification, so away from China towards especially other Asian economies and closer to home towards Mexico. So. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to ask, just in terms of diversification away, it does seem like a lot of that would be in South and Central America, which in turn, if an event like the Red Sea, everything that's going on with the Red Sea, you would be able to kind of bypass that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, being caught once is one thing, but being caught twice is another. So we had the pandemic, and now with this Red Sea, so you really don't want to be living your life like this going forward. And there's the whole area of protectionism and climate change, which add additional risk to shipping and supply chain. So diversification and resilience is everything.
All right, we had some S&P global PMI data out today. This came in better than expected, better than last month. What should we take away from that?
Yeah, surprising resilience in the U.S. economy, right? This is, and the ISM data that come out as well have supported that. It looks like we're doing well. If you drill down into the data, there's encouraging signs of this being broader based as well. Consumer spending seems to be reviving again on goods and services. So to maybe backtrack a little bit, if you go back a few months, this strength that we've had in the global economy and the US economy is driven by financial services, right? This was the big acceleration we saw. And this is all predicated on lower interest rates in 2024. Remember back in December, they were pricing in 160 basis points of cuts. And that spurred this big strength, demand for new mortgages and so forth.
From the UK, and I'm the inventor of the gel razor, and today I'm looking for an angel investor to fund my project, the gel razor, whether that's a working concept and working prototype or manufacturing possibilities with investment or to get me a licensing deal secured. If you go in any supermarket today, you will see packets of razors sold separately with tins of mousse or gel. Hence I developed the all-in-one. The idea is you pressurize the handle, the gel flows through the reservoir up to the head of the razor, coating the blades, ready for shave. My target market is 18 plus, male or female, male blue version, female pink version. What I'm looking for in an investor is someone who's passionate, determined, shares my vision. That's an important step for me, and willing to succeed as I wanted to succeed myself. Patented in the UK in 2021 September. With copyright protection, I have a logo for the gel razor, which you will see on my LinkedIn profile. Currently working with a company in the US who have done me a lovely sell sheet. Big up to them guys. So if you're interested, contact me on LinkedIn profile, Paul J. Gwilt, GWILT, or email me at mufc219@gmail.com.
In New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, Daly, and John. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are poised to move much closer to winning their party's nominations during the biggest day of the primary campaign. It is Super Tuesday, and voters in more than a dozen.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
The aircraft was not going to make it.
It crashed near a Costco and burst into flames. No survivors. Texas's plan to arrest migrants who enter the U.S. illegally and order them to leave the country is headed to the Supreme Court in a legal.
Welcome to the digital age. Are you struggling to stand out here? Don't worry. Meet Blue TV, who is your digital superhero.
Blue TV is a multi-purpose online media network that also provides digital marketing services. We are based in Islamabad, Pakistan. We are expert in creative marketing, social media and digital marketing, search engine optimization, web design, page rank, and SERPs, video editing, recording and production.
So, what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone and call or WhatsApp Blue TV on given number, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/blue.online.tv.
With Blue TV, your business growth will be skyrocketed.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. A lot of red on the screen today. There is pressure coming from a dip in Apple shares. That's weighing on the Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500. The stock sagging after a report that iPhone sales in China fell 24% during the first 6 weeks of the year. Apple shares right now down close to 3%. A Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell's two-day testimony before Congress, that starts tomorrow, and also the February jobs report, that's out Friday. Those continue to be some of the focal points for investors. Nancy Tangler at Laffer Tangler says today's market is similar to the stock rally back in the 1990s.
There are so many similarities that demonstrate that stocks can coexist with higher interest rates. So the 10-year was about 5 to 7% during the decade. Inflation was about 3%. But we also had a labor shortage. And that is when companies spend on technology to improve productivity. And we are 3 quarters in to pretty decent productivity numbers.
Target shares more than 11% higher after its earnings report, the best performing stock in the S&P 500. Overall, the index, the S&P 500, 45 points lower. That's down 0.9%. The Dow down 259 points. The Nasdaq 100 down 319 points. That's a decline of 1.75%. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. I was thinking about coming up with a Bailey stock index. During the commercial break, he was telling us every one of these stores, retailers, or whatever that have gone bankrupt.
Well, Z Gallery ordered a couch from there. A month later, they filed for bankruptcy. That one was my fault, though. That was their third bankruptcy filing. But they were done. As you mentioned, JT, at the beginning, Bowflex. I have the adjustable dumbbells and a treadmill. Sure. Not looking great. And as we're about to talk to Max about, NYCB, New York Community Bank, owns Flagstar, who owns my house. So things are going well.
Maybe you can get a break on your mortgage.
We could do an ETF on them, like the contra bet kind of thing. All right, Max Abelson joins us here. He's no stranger to this program. He's a financial reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. He's also the reporter on the Big Take story for Bloomberg News today. And these are really in-depth, well-reported, deeply sourced stories that we love. They come out on a daily basis. I don't know how Bloomberg News does it. Today's a good one on the New York Community Bank. So my question, Max, is how did we get here? I thought NYCB was just making loans to local real estate. And how does that go wrong?
It sounds kind of boring, doesn't it?
Yeah, but now it's not.
They are not boring. And what's happening in the last few weeks is not boring either. I think now it's up today, but when we were putting the story to bed last night, the shares had fallen 70% just this year. And we're not that far into 2024. So, I think that there's a temptation that I have as a journalist, maybe all reporters have this, to be able to give a kind of, not a facile answer, but a simple answer. It'd be so nice. Reporting would be so much better if I could just be answer that in 5 words. But the reality is this is a story that has to do with ambition, has to do with the sort of the small wanting to get big and the big wanting to get bigger. And it's a story that has to do with regulation and regulators and the rules that govern banking and real estate. And it's a story about my first beat in journalism, Manhattan apartments. You cannot tell the story of what has happened here at New York Community Bank without telling the story of real estate. So it's got these kind of 3 vectors, and I hope people read the story because I think we did a fun job with my editor, David Shear, of kind of trying to trying to paint a picture, create a portrait.
And Max, this is a company that grew tremendously through deals. Just looking at one of your paragraphs, 2004, they cobbled together 7 banks into the 3rd biggest thrift in the U.S. As it hit $23 billion of assets, up from $1.9 billion in 3 years. Yeah. So how did we get from 2000 to 04 to now in 2024?
Yep. They really had a game plan. And the game plan was to, gobble up rivals, essentially keep their personalities. It's not like everything became New York Community Bank. And then they would take the mom and pop depositor money and they would really just loan it out to Manhattan real estate and one kind of real estate in particular, which is rent stabilized, rent regulated. And for a long time that's a good business to be in. It was a good business to be in. It's like, I don't know if you have you were just saying that Flagstar owns your house, but if you lived in a rent stabilized apartment, I mean, by and large, you're made in the shade. You do not want to leave that apartment. You're going to stay there. It's going to be stable earnings. Cash is going to keep flowing. But what happened though is 2 things. Rent regulations changed in 2019, right before COVID started emptying Manhattan. So real estate all of a sudden under pressure. New York Community Bank also keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They do a $10 billion deal, couple $1 billion. They want to get even bigger, and apparently it seems that regulators may have put a kibosh on it. Then Flagstar. They buy Flagstar. They even buy, you may remember, Signature Bank, a part of Signature Bank. Yep. All of a sudden, they cross over $100 billion. And you know what happens then? Regulators start looking at you in a new way. And their capital did not measure up to rivals.
Now, with hindsight, why didn't they recognize that? Or did they recognize it and chose not to deal with it? What kind of happened there?
Okay, I'll tell you some inside baseball about this. So after Flagstar and New York Community Bank announced their deal, the regulatory approval that they need, and this is going to sound boring, but I promise it will not be boring. The regulatory approval that they're going to need is going to come from a regulator called the FDIC. Time goes by. They seem to not be getting that approval. And they say, guess what, everyone? When our deal is approved, we're going to go from being a thrift to being essentially a nationally chartered bank. And lo and behold, guess what that means? You know what? We don't need the FDIC's approval anymore. We're just going to take the OCC's approval, thank you very much. And we found nonprofit groups complaining and being like, what is the deal with this? How are they allowed to, it's essentially called regulatory arbitrage. It's the mean knock on it is kind of shopping for regulators. You know, whether or not that happened, what did happen is that the OCC eventually approved it, and they said, we're going to let this go, but we get to control your dividends, if you want to boost your dividends. And one of the things that knocked all of this mayhem into action is that New York Community Bank a few weeks ago said, we're cutting our dividend. So all these pieces fit together into a portrait of a bank that got really big, was really big in real estate, and those two major parts of its game plan kind of contained the seeds of this chaos that we're seeing right now.
Well, and Max, a year ago and change, we had the issue with SVB, we had the issue with Signature Bank, First Republic. Similarities, differences with where New York Community is now compared to kind of the flurry of bank failures we had?
I hope he's not listening. I want to steal something that Mike Moore, who sits next to me and is my boss and one of my editors, said to me. One of the things that happened with First Republic and even with Signature was like things that were already going down. You know, there were problems that could be visible to anyone who opened up the books. The difference with New York Community Bank is the problems are in a way about the future. What everyone is afraid of right now when it comes to banks and real estate is that loans are going to sour. I mean, we're in an office tower right now. You know, the landscape of offices in New York has changed. I think people are really worried that there's going to be a kind of reckoning coming. And that reckoning is not just going to mess with the real estate industry, it's going to mess with the banks that lend to it. And I think there's a fear that that New York Community Bank, which is already shocked investors by saying, listen, we're going to have to set aside $500 million in loan loss reserves. I think there's a lot of concern. They're going to have to set aside even more. And so in some ways, maybe one accurate way of describing what's going on now is a kind of not just anxiety about the current moment, but an anxiety about what the future will hold here in New York City.
Real quickly, 30 seconds. What's happened to management? Has anybody kind of paid a price here?
Oh, someone paid a price. Someone paid a price. Tom Kangemi, who was kind of the main act in this town hall that I found that we wove into the story, he was replaced by the guy who was the second fiddle at that town hall, whose guy's name is Sandra Dinello. He was the head of Flagstar. A few weeks ago, the bank announced, listen, just kidding, Sandra Dinello is now actually going to be the most important executive. And after that, they said, just kidding again, Sandra Dinello is now going to be the CEO.
Wow.
Carousel of management is never positive.
Yeah. So anyway, NYCB is the ticker. It is up 10% today. That's the good news. The bad news, it's down 70% year to date, down 60% on a trailing 12-month basis. Really fighting for its life here. So this is just great reporting from Max Abelson. We expect that from Max. He always delivers. The big take stories always deliver. And you can read the story on the Bloomberg Terminal, NI space Big Take, or you can go to Bloomberg.com/Big Take, and that's where you find all that really good reporting coming out of Bloomberg News on a daily basis. Max, thanks so much for joining us. Max Abelson, finance reporter, Bloomberg News, here in our studio. S&P 500, we got some weakening again here on the market. The S&P is off about almost 1% there. We'll call it 1%. The NASDAQ off 1.7% here. Looking at Bitcoin, off 3.7% now, 64,000. I call it 65,000 even. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with a look at some of the company stories we're following. Let's start with Tesla, the stock on course to shed $76 billion in market capitalization in just 2 days. This is all fueled by negative headlines from China and Germany, and it's rekindling concerns about the company's growth trajectory. Shipments from Tesla's Shanghai factory sank to the lowest in over a year in the month of February. So that's weighing on the automaker's stock, which is down just about 5% today. Remember, it closed 7.2% lower yesterday. Well, hundreds of thousands of people apparently are having difficulty accessing Meta Platforms' family of social media sites. This includes Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. More than 500,000 people said they couldn't access Facebook. This according to Down Detector, which monitors internet and telecom disruptions. The number dropped to about 200,000 about 30 minutes later. There were more than 73,000 reports about Instagram at its peak and a smaller number of complaints about WhatsApp and Threads. Andy Stone is a spokesperson for Meta. In a post on X, he says, "We are aware people are having trouble accessing our services. We're working on this now." I'm told they have their best people on this. The Biden administration seeking public comments on small acquisitions by private equity companies in the healthcare industry. The Federal Trade Commission, the Justice Department, and the Department of Health and Human Services said in a request for public comments published today that they're seeking information on deals that weren't reported to the federal antitrust agencies. The FTC chair, Linda Kahn, says when private equity firms buy out healthcare facilities only to slash staffing and cut quality, the patients are the ones who lose out. And that is your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Looking like we have a proper sell-off in the market today. The S&P 500 off 1%. The NASDAQ off 1.8% here. Yields pulling in slightly. You got the 10-year Treasury yielding 4.14%. Tremendous volatility in Bitcoin. It's now at 65,200. It had been as low as 64,600 today, as high as 69,000 as well. So about a $5,000 swing there in Bitcoin today. Talk about volatility. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, Bailey, and John. It is Super Tuesday as voters in more than a dozen states are heading to the polls. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are poised to move much closer to winning their party's nominations during the biggest day of the primary campaign. Much of the attention will be on the Republican side, where Nikki Haley is hoping to win enough delegates to stay in the race against former President Trump. Meanwhile, Joe Matthew, host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power, says he will be watching for the possible announcement of a third-party candidate, possibly under the no-label centrist ticket.
I don't think that's likely, by the way. I don't think they've found their person yet. But if you're talking to Biden supporters quietly, it remains their biggest fear. And I will add RFK Jr. to that. This guy's polling at 15% in Quinnipiac, and nobody's talking about it. That might be a bigger threat than no labels.
Bloomberg's Joe Matthew will host a special Balance of Power for Super Tuesday night. It begins at 8 p.m. Wall Street time. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is meeting again with his counterpart from Qatar in Washington today. Qatar has been a key player in facilitating the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, and the Biden administration has been urging both parties to come to an agreement quickly. Vice President Harris said that there needs to be a 6-week ceasefire at the very least to curb the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And Blinken today said that Israel needs to allow more aid into Gaza, ceasefire or not.
The situation for children, for women, for men who are caught in this crossfire Hamas is making inside of Gaza is unacceptable and unsustainable.
Blinken is calling for Hamas to sign a ceasefire deal. A Republican senator is criticizing the Biden administration's move to cap credit card late fees at $8. GOP Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina says the cap will ultimately raise rates for many borrowers. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, Bailey, John.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Well, Bailey, we got another Ivy League university reinstating the SAT. So we got Brown University, is again requiring the SAT or ACT for admission, becoming the third Ivy League college this year to announce a return to standardized testing following a pause caused by the pandemic. Since a Supreme Court ruling last June said that colleges can't use race in admissions, admissions officers have been trying to figure out the best ways to recruit students. Dartmouth and Yale both said having a test score can give admissions officers more context about the applicant's application to determine if they can succeed at their school. So the ACT, which had been phased out during the pandemic for a variety of reasons, not the least of which you can't get people together to take it anymore, now it's starting to come back.
Yeah, back in my day in 2012, I took both. And looking at some of this data, only 5% of the more than 1,000 members of the Common App are requiring the test in 2023, 2024, compares to 55% in 2019 before the pandemic. Yep. One of the things, though, Paul, I went to Syracuse. Yep. Considered Syracuse and University of Chicago. Brown doesn't require electives, so that was something that caught my eye. So you major in finance, you don't have to take a science class if you don't want to. So
interesting. Well, I just had, my youngest is now a freshman in college, and he did not have to take the SAT, ACT, so we missed that whole anxiety situation. It was so great as parents.
Yeah, I can
we
imagine.
were psyched about it, that we didn't have to deal with it. And I don't know, it seems to me it's just another data point. And I could see if I were an admissions officer, it would be a data point, not the data point, probably maybe even a lowly weighted data point, but a data point nonetheless. So starting to come back here for some of these universities. Let's see how the rest of higher education, if they follow or not. Busy, busy day in politics, to say the least. Super Tuesday, 15 states having a primary today. Balance of power is what you need. Balance of power with Joe Matthew from Washington, D.C. That starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It's Super Tuesday, but is it really super? Welcome to the fastest show in politics as voters get busy in 16 states across 6 time zones with over a third of the delegates at stake in what many see, though, as another coronation for Donald Trump. We'll find out together, of course, here and talk about it ahead with Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison with us in Washington today. Insights coming on the issues driving the Republican primary from Jennifer Nassour, a conversation with the former chair of the Massachusetts Republican Party. And we've got our political panel in place. Republican strategist, Bloomberg Politics contributor Rick Davis, alongside Democratic analyst Brad Howard at Corcoran Street Group. This is it, Super Tuesday. We start, as always, on Wall Street with Charlie Pellet in New York. An update on trading. How's it look, Charlie?
It looks like a lot of red on the screen, Joe Matthew, with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining. Stocks under pressure as a trio of tech heavyweights slide. We're talking about Tesla, Apple, and Advanced Micro Devices. Traders are wading through mixed economic data in the run-up to Jay Powell's testimony to Congress tomorrow. And, of course, Friday, the all-important jobs report. Right now, the S&P down 46, a drop right now of just about 0.9%. The Dow down 291, lower by 0.7%. Should point out the S&P 500 index right now very close to session lows. We got the NASDAQ Composite Index down 263 points, a drop there of 1.6%. 10-year right now at 4.14%. The 2-year 4.55%. Spot gold today up 0.6%, 21.27 the ounce. A retreat for crude to 78.46 a barrel. Talking about West Texas Intermediate down 0.3%. Bitcoin has been all over the map today, was trading above $69,000. Right now, Bitcoin $65,184. Bitcoin with a loss right now of 3.4%. Fed Chair Jay Powell will be on Capitol Hill tomorrow for his semi-annual report to Congress. Constance Hunter is senior advisory to macro policy perspectives. And this morning on Surveillance, she told us Powell is right to wait on rate cuts.
I think that it pays for them to be cautious on so many different levels, right? That's their job. They need to be measured. They need to be careful. And because you have this productivity, it gives them extra policy space, right? They can wait a little longer because the economy is strong enough.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. Among those tech heavyweights, Tesla now down 4.6%, Apple down 2.8%, Advanced Micro Devices down 1.9%. Again, recapping stocks lower across the board. S&P down 47, down 0.9. I'm Charlie Pellet. That, Joe Matthew, is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we thank you. Welcome to this Super Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We're going to spend a little bit of time together today, if you dare, here on Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. As always, our coverage is live from Washington and New York. If you search Bloomberg Global News, you'll find our live radio feed there. We'll meet you in the studio because we're in for the duration here. We've got Balance of Power now. We've got Balance of Power later. And then our special coverage, Super Tuesday election night, starts 8 p.m. Washington time here on Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube. Kaylee Lyons will be with us. And we're going to be following the leadership here in part of Laura Davison, who has done such a great job as our politics editor here in Washington. And I wanted to sit down with Laura just to start things off as we look ahead to 16 states to get a sense of how to watch this tonight and what we should be paying attention to, because so many people are looking at this as, well, frankly, anticlimactic. First thing Tom Keene asked me today is Super Tuesday really super? And it's kind of hard to make the argument, Laura Davison. Great to see you. Welcome back. Of course. This is going to be a late night for you. Let me rephrase that. Tell us what Bloomberg's political news editor is looking at on this strange Super Tuesday.
Well, I still think it's super. So I want to put in a plug for at least super in terms of the number of states that are voting.
That's right.
So first, what's going to happen is we have all those East Coast states coming in. These could be some places that are really good for Nikki Haley. Not that she's going to win, but are sort of bellwethers of does she continue to stay in this race. I'm talking about Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Virginia. Those are going to be some of the first results we'll see. She has really hinted that she is looking at not just, results and delegates as a way to keep her in, but sort of what percentage of the vote is she getting? Is she still raising money? So she's committed to staying in this race through Super Tuesday. We'll see if she, drops out tonight or if she stays in for longer. Trump is very likely to sweep most, if not all, of the states tonight. So he has a big event down at Mar-a-Lago, and so I expect we'll see a very buoyant Victoria speech from him as a real pivot to the general election, which really he's already been doing for weeks now.
We've been working on that since New Hampshire. It's funny, as a native New Englander, I'm just chuckling at this idea of watch Vermont and Massachusetts and Maine the night of the Republican primary. Doesn't that tell us a lot about where we are?
Yes, the New Englanders finally get their spot in the limelight, but this is really kind of just a gauge of kind of where are Trump's weak spots in the party. Who's showing up in the suburbs. Obviously there are kind of weird dynamics at play here because there are Democrats that are crossing party lines to go vote for Nikki Haley in the primary. So some of the data could be a little cloudy coming out of this. But what we're going to be doing for weeks going forward is looking at, what are the weak spots for Trump? What are the weak spots for Biden? There's also, an effort in Minnesota, like there was in Michigan last week, to vote uncommitted. Right. It seems like that kind of is an issue that's sort of falling off the wayside after Michigan didn't really, they got 13% of the vote, but not enough to really make a difference in terms of delegates.
All eyes on the Trapp family lodge tonight. By God, anything could happen. It's interesting. We'll be talking with Jennifer Nassour in a moment, former Massachusetts party chair. She knows what we're talking about here. Nikki Haley, this is interesting. 11 of the 15 states holding Republican primaries are open to more than just registered Republicans. This is what you're referring to, are some of these states where she could potentially outperform. That's why some folks are calling this the last stand for her. Is that unfair?
I think her last stand may have been a couple contests to go, but technically Trump has not clinched the nomination yet, and he still won't tonight. It'll be either next week or the week after that he'll likely sew all of this up. But this is her last chance to really make a splash. There are a bunch of states voting. Interestingly, she's not doesn't have a public event tonight, so we'll see when and how and if we hear from her. But she's been on the campaign trail up until that. She's been in Texas yesterday. She was in Massachusetts. She's been able to sort of galvanize the attention, and we'll see if she continues to do that.
What do you make of that speech? Victory or concession speech on Super Tuesday night?
You know, I think she, like Nancy Pelosi, you don't say anything, you don't vote, you don't do whatever until you have something to say.
So that doesn't mean she won't make a speech. We could find something late scheduled. Maybe we have an announcement of some sort. We'll wait and find out.
Yeah, certainly. But she's already started to roll out leadership teams in some of these states. You know, they're voting Louisiana later in the month. Yeah. So I anticipate she'll stay in a little bit longer, you know, with the caveat that people drop out at all times for all reasons with no warning. But she's sending signs that she might stay in, you know, at least for a couple more weeks. She has been raising money still. She can certainly do that. And once you are no longer a candidate, you lose a lot of your cachet, you lose your platform. So, you know, there are benefits for her to staying in the race.
The money's still coming in, and it looks like it will not be presumptive nominee Donald Trump until likely March 19th. He could do it on the 12th, but probably not. So why not stick it out? Is that the idea?
That's sort of the thinking. Yeah. And, you know, and she could potentially then be well-placed. You know, she doesn't have a lot of delegates, but she has, you know, a handful of delegates that, you know, if Trump were to implode for some reason, she would at least be positioned to say, okay, I'm the heir apparent. You know, that's not necessarily how it works. The Republican Party, anyone could jump in at that point. Yeah. But and also, you know, I think there's been some interesting chatter among Democrats. You have Gavin Newsom, governor of California, coming out and saying, you know, Nikki Haley is our best surrogate against Trump. Democrats should want her to stay in the race because she, you know, is making all the arguments, but to the right audience that we want to hear, you know, about Trump.
Not likely to help her in some states tonight. We could not have Super Tuesday without Laura Davison. Great to see you, Laura. Good luck with your coverage. Stay in touch. We'll be watching for you, of course, as always, on the terminal and online. Bloomberg News Politics editor Laura Davison with us here in studio on Super Tuesday, Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we add the voice of Jennifer Nassour, the aforementioned Republican strategist and former chairwoman of the Massachusetts Republican Party, back with us here on the program. Last time we spoke, Jen, was on New Hampshire primary eve, and there was still a feel that Nikki Haley could make a dent here going into South Carolina and into Super Tuesday. Is it fair to call this the last stand for Nikki Haley? How are you looking at her chances tonight if Vermont is the state we're focused on?
I don't think, coming from Massachusetts, I have a feeling like Vermont's not the state that we're focused on. However, she did get the endorsement of the governor of Vermont. She did get the endorsement of Susan Collins in Maine. And in Massachusetts, we have 64% of our electorate are actually unenrolled voters. And we see that both parties, Republican and Democratic parties, have lost voters in the last year, which I think speaks volumes about where both parties have been going and the messaging from the super far right MAGA and from the super far left progressives. And so I think she's going to have a great night here. I think in Virginia, you see what happened in D.C., that, you know, most of the people who work in D.C. live in Virginia, so I think there's a carryover there. So I think that Nikki's going to do really well tonight, and it's far from over. I mean, listen, anyone can do math. If you do math, the magic number is 1,215, and Donald Trump is only at 240. There's a long way to go there. And so tonight, there are 874 delegates up for takes. And so we'll see how she fares tonight. But she's not going anywhere. She was here this weekend in Massachusetts. We had over 1,000 people at a rally for her. We had a fundraiser for her, raised a ton of money. Donors are coming, new faces are coming out, people are energized. From Massachusetts, she went from North Carolina to Massachusetts to Vermont and to Maine. The woman has done almost 8,600 miles in 10 days. I don't think Donald Trump has done 8,600 miles in the last 8 years.
No, I know, yet he continues to dominate in the polls, and he's going to steamroll through states like Texas and California tonight. I appreciate your passion, and it's contagious, Jen, but, you know, we had Chris Sununu on with us last night talking about a closing window. The path could get a lot more difficult after tonight, right? How do you see that continuing through the next couple of weeks?
So look, you know, anyone who's run for office before or been involved in a campaign, you know that you need two things. You need the volunteers and you need the donors, because those are the two things that actually make the campaign continue to move. And so as long as the volunteers aren't going anywhere, and I can tell you, people will follow Nikki anywhere she goes. That's number one. And number two, those donors, like I said, I had a full room of new faces on Saturday night. I think that that is something that, you cannot replicate. And at the end of the day, Trump, listen, 70% of the country doesn't want another Biden-Trump showdown. 60% believe both Biden and Trump are too old to be in office. And 40% of voters continuously say that they do not want Donald Trump to be the nominee of the Republican Party. And that's not
the curse
40%
of this
of
primary
the general
season for
electorate, that's
folks like
40%
you,
of
right?
Republican voters.
Sure. That's the curse of this primary season for Republicans like you, though. If the whole country were like Massachusetts, we'd be having maybe a more deliberate conversation here. But he's 30 and 40 points ahead in the polls that seem to count here. So is this another kind of momentum play? You see her making a dent tonight and then going to a state like Florida? I'm just trying to figure out how you get through the primary against Donald Trump. You can make the case that she's a better candidate against Joe Biden, but this is a tough time now, isn't it?
Well, I think Republican primary voters need to wake up, quite frankly. Listen, at the end of the day, you can win a playoff, but are you going to win the championship? And the answer is no. With Donald Trump, Fox News poll came out the other day. He was 2 to 3 points ahead of Joe Biden. That is within the margin of error. That is, any bad news story will sink that campaign. Whereas Nikki Haley is 8 to 18 points, depending on the poll. And that is exactly where she has continued to be this entire time. So if you do not want another Joe Biden administration, if you do not want a Kamala Harris administration, then you need to vote for Nikki Haley, because you have an opportunity to actually put someone on the ballot that you want right now. In November, you have no choice. You have a choice between the two people who have been selected for you.
This is why I know you love hearing conversations about no labels and third parties. If we end up with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, anything could happen there, knowing, to your point, that polls suggest that voters want an alternative here. We're spending time with Jennifer Nassour, the former Massachusetts Republican Party chair, Republican strategist. Talk to us about issues while you're here, Jen, because it's obviously driving decisions this evening. In New Hampshire, we were talking about immigration in a state not typically associated with our southwest border, maybe the Canadian border. But we've also added abortion since Joe Biden was elected because of Roe v. Wade. You've spoken passionately about the impact it had on the midterms and other races since then. And then, of course, the economy. What are voters carrying into the booth tonight, or is it not a monolith? Is it different issues in different states?
I think it's the same issues. It's just how they're focused and how they're tailored, right? So I know here in Massachusetts, we're a sanctuary state, unfortunately. And here's what happened. All the migrants came to Massachusetts so that way they could find housing and whatever line they were pitched by the administration. They came here, and now they're kicking out our senior citizens and our veterans from their housing. They kicked out children from a rec center in one of the most difficult neighborhoods in the city of Boston. So kids were displaced in the middle of winter without any place to go, thrown out on the street where there's gang violence, there's drugs. It was unbelievable to house 200 to 300 migrants. They took over a hotel in one of the suburbs, and then to house migrants, and then they opened up a restaurant that had been shuttered as a catering facility. That is all on the backs of the taxpayers. And so I think the immigration issue is an issue for everyone, but it's how it affects everyone. In Massachusetts, the most important issue is always the economy, but that immigration issue is absolutely affecting our bottom line here. The abortion issue is going to continue to be, and if Republicans don't wake up and adopt Nikki Haley's view and platform on abortion, we are a dead party. Because at the end of the day, women will always care about this issue. It is always going to be a big issue. May not be the number one issue, but it will always continue to be an issue. We need to have real conversations with women around the country about what can realistically happen and our own views and how that affects policy and how government should stay out of your bedroom.
Jen, I've got less than a minute. Does Nikki Haley need to win something tonight to keep going in this race?
She just needs to win delegates. As long as she keeps delegates away from Donald Trump, she stays in the race.
There you have it. Jennifer Nassour, it's good to see you again. Republican strategist, former chair of the Republican Party in Massachusetts, with the view from the Northeast, where a lot of us are going to be looking tonight to see the performance of Nikki Haley here on this Super Tuesday. I'm glad you're with us. It's 15 states in play here for Republicans tonight. We're going to be walking through the time zones together in not only our normal political coverage here on Balance of Power, the early edition, and the later episode at 5 p.m. Kaylee will be with us, as will later on our signature panel with special coverage tonight starting at 8 p.m. Washington time, and will be across all of our platforms when the polls start to close later in the evening. So we're just getting started here, and I'm glad you're with us. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Balance of Power, fastest show in politics. We'll spend some time with Nathan Dean coming up as we also look forward to a State of the Union this week. This is Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the red right now. Stocks are under pressure as a trio of tech heavyweights, AMD, Apple, Tesla, all slipping today. Traders are wading through mixed economic data in the run-up to Jay Powell's testimony to Congress beginning tomorrow. So here's where we stand. The S&P now down by 44 points. That is a drop now of 0.9%. Dow Industrials down 256 points, a decline right now of 0.7%. The Nasdaq Composite Index down 252, a slump there of 1.5%. The 10-year at 4.14%, the 2-year 4.55%. We've got spot gold up $15 the ounce, 21,029, up 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude 78.07 a barrel. WTI down now by 0.9%. Bitcoin, a volatile day there. Bitcoin right now back at 64,700, down 4.1%. Bitcoin was trading above $69,000. Target's fourth quarter profit beat estimates. Target shares surging now by more than 11%, 11.6%. We've got Walmart, among other retailers, up 1.1%. The investor group seeking to acquire Macy's is against that retailer's plans to close 150 stores. That according to Arkhouse managing partner Gabriel Kahane. Today, Macy's shares up by 0.4%. Again, recapping, S&P down now by 42 points, dropped there at 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash, and with a long day ahead of him, back we go to Washington. Balance of Power continues. Here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, nowhere else we'd rather be on Super Tuesday, of course, with you live now from Washington. On this Super Tuesday, we're talking about the delegates, and we'll be throughout the day here. Nearly a third of those at stake up for grabs here. 865 Republican delegates across 15 states voting here, 6 time zones. Are you ready? Of course you are. Most people seem to think they know how this is going to end already. So Super Tuesday in air quotes here. It's going to be meaningful in terms of delegate distribution, but it might not be a very newsy night. We'll put it that way. Some of the undercard races we're following, in fact, could provide a lot more interest, as we'll talk a little later on this hour. The jungle primary in California could be its own reality show, and we'll get there. We'll also get to the State of the Union. You know, Joe Biden is focused more on the speech Thursday than he is on any contest tonight. In fact, he just got back to the White House, if not a minute ago, a minute from now. He's just coming back from Camp David. They've been up there for about 3 days, working on the big speech, the joint session of Congress Thursday night. We'll have special coverage of that, too, because we live for this stuff. But it's going to be important for Joe Biden, the candidate and the president. We've talked about the candidate side. This will be the biggest crowd he gets until the convention, an important opportunity to talk to the American people when you're running for re-election. But there's, of course, a lot more to it in terms of policy, and we want to get a sense of what's going to end up in this big speech with the help of Nathan Dean, of course, senior policy analyst here in Washington at Bloomberg Intelligence. It's good to see you, Nathan. You predicted, by the way, we're going to have a segment at some point called Called It. Nathan called it on credit card fees. Maybe that wasn't a huge leap to know that it would be in there somehow, but we're actually getting specifics on what he's going to say. What do you know?
Yeah, so this morning, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau released its long-awaited final rule on credit card late fees. Now, what this does is it takes the current credit card late fee around $32 and it drops it down to $8. Now, this is only applicable to credit card issuers that have more than 1 million open accounts, which is most of them. But in terms of fees, it's going to take around, in 2022, there was about $14 billion in such fees. This is going to make around 10.5 disappear almost overnight. So now there could be court challenges to this, but this is indicative of what President Biden is thinking in terms of his State of the Union address. If you go back 3 years ago, he created something called the White House Competition Council.
Yes, right.
Don't be surprised if you see a lot of talk about how I'm lowering fees on credit cards, transportation, agriculture. The Department of Agriculture did something very similar this week. Even Ticketmaster. I doubt Taylor Swift's going to get mentioned, but this is some of the things that he's trying to mention in terms of bringing these costs down for consumers. But as we're telling our clients, a lot of what he's going to mention tonight is things that happened in the past or he's already mentioned. New initiatives may be a little bit harder to come by.
Maybe he could have Pearl Jam in the First Lady's box, do the Ticketmaster thing, have the band stand up, young up the demographic. You're making this work already, Nathan.
I try.
Absolutely. Now, what's this $8 fee, the $8 limit thing? Is it a monthly cap? How does that work?
No, so it is a monthly cap. So the way it works right now is that it's a safe harbor. Essentially, it states. Funny enough, the law doesn't allow you to say that you can limit it by this dollar amount.
Yep.
But what the CFPB is doing here is they're offering a safe harbor, meaning that you can lower this cap to around $8. And the caps, the current caps vary. We say it's $32 on average, but some of the big banks out there are around $27. Some are as low as $10. So it really depends on what the current aspect is. But it goes down to $8. The other thing to note is that this is just one of many initiatives the CFPB is pursuing at the moment, all in the while that they're waiting to hear from the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of their funding. And if the Supreme Court comes back and says, look, the CFPB funding isn't constitutional, there could be some concerns with this rule. So this isn't a done deal. We still think that there's more litigation on this to come.
What are they doing about airline fees? Everybody wants to know about airfares.
There's a lot of, the Department of Transportation's been looking at this, a lot of...
They can't touch it, though, can they?
No, but a lot of what the work is being done is on disclosures. So think about going to the movies. Remember back when they used to go to the movies, and next thing you know, you'd be sitting there for 30 minutes worth of previews,
Right.
and you're like, wait a minute, why 1 o'clock start time?
I forgot what movie I came to see.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of what the Biden administration is doing, a lot of it is obviously lowering these fees, but a lot of it's also in disclosures. And the idea here is the more information that you give the consumer, the more information that they'll take into account, and maybe they won't go to the movie at 1 o'clock if they're going to be sitting there till 1:30.
Yes.
So a lot of it really comes down to the actions that have financial impact, but there are actions in here that also have consumer impact underlying all these impacts to the company.
Did you see Dune already? Tell me you saw Dune 2.
I haven't seen Dune 1.
You haven't seen the... Oh, man, come on. I thought you were going to tell me it was great, and then I really would have been excited to go. Drug prices, insulin. He says that every time he gets near a microphone. That's all part of this package, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's not part of the junk fee package, but
the lowering fees.
Yes, but it is part of the
from this
Competition Council. And so the drug pricing aspect is, my colleague Dwayne Wright put out a note on this earlier this week. This is something that he's going to try and, I think, not only tout the efforts that he's done, but also this is one of the words where I think that there's going to be new initiatives as well. For example, just yesterday there was an op-ed from the former NEC chairman talking about Ozempic, the weight loss drug, and how the impact on taxpayers could be even $1 trillion at a certain point.
Isn't that something?
And so, I just think that drug prices is something that resonates with voters, because if you go to CVS or Walgreens, when you sign up and you're paying your copay or something like that, it's expensive. So, he's trying to tout all this stuff to combat the Biden, I don't want to call it the reputation of Biden economics, but the idea that Bidenomics actually does lower inflation and does.
This is going to be more
fees.
than a paragraph in the speech. This sounds like a good 10-minute chunk on lowering fees, maybe more than that, coupled with raising taxes on the wealthy. And it's going to come a day after Nathan Dean. Jay Powell is up on the Hill, although he's doing both days, right? This is Humphrey Hawkins. That's interesting. These are some of the same lawmakers will be sitting in the hall who will be hitting him with questions and listening him to talk about the war on inflation. How does that impact the conversation?
So there's two things that you have when you have Jerome Powell go into the Hill. The first is the monetary policy conversation. But, because the House Financial Services Committee has 50-plus lawmakers and they all get 5 minutes, there's only so many monetary policy questions you can ask.
Fair enough.
So there's also going to be the regulatory question. And for us, it really comes down to this proposal known as the Basel III Endgame. This is the proposal that would raise capital requirements for the banks up to about 20% for the big ones, 5 to 6% for the regional banks. But the question here is, everybody in Washington has this consensus that the Fed is going to have to drastically scale back or substantially change this rule, but people want to know, are they going to repropose it or not? And so they're going to be looking for Jerome Powell to give us any indication. And look, he's a master at testifying and not providing any information
so he's
whatsoever.
Not going to.
So don't be surprised if he just says, we're working in it, we're taking considerations, we're going to try and find consensus, and everybody in Washington is going to try and figure out what he actually means by that. But maybe we'll get lucky and he'll just say that, we're not going to. There's also rumors going around that the Fed could be looking at liquidity standards, that there's a new proposal on that. There's a new proposal on the discount window. Any information that he gives us on that will be extremely helpful. And for purposes of watching it, I'll have my Bloomberg popcorn for the House Financial Services Committee, because you get a lot more questions. When it comes to the Senate Banking Committee, there's a little bit more fatigue, a lot less people asking questions.
Interesting.
So the House is the one that I'm going to particularly pay
grandstanding.
for.
Yeah, that's where the commercials are recorded, of course, right? So it sounds like we're going to make more news on regulation than interest rates or any sense of what might happen in the next couple of meetings here.
Well, just remember, I'm a regulations person, so I always have that bias. And my monetary policy colleagues always get angry when I say, oh, look, here's the monetary policy hearing, and we're talking about financial regulation again. Yeah. But, I think, listening to what our chief rate strategist is saying and so forth, there are going to be significant discussions here about what the future of the rate strategy is for the Fed. Because, look, it doesn't get any more important than that in an election year for the president. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you the folks at the White House are going to be watching this for any indication of what Jerome Powell is thinking on that as well.
Well, so then the message from the president is, you need to know I've brought down inflation this much, but the job is not yet complete, right? We're not doing victory laps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you were to pluck out voters from Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all these blue states, purple states, that are going to be key to Biden's victory this year and say, how are you feeling on inflation? They may be different than what people are saying versus what the numbers are thinking. And so for the president, it's really going to be to try and hammer that message because, as you pointed out, this is probably the last time he's going to be able to address the nation on this until the convention.
That's correct. Boy, I'll tell you what. So breaking news there with Nathan Dean, Pearl Jam in the First Lady's box for the State of the Union. Who would have thought he would bring that kind of news in with us today? I kid, of course. It's always good to spend time with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here on Super Tuesday. Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. Let's bring you up to date now. Before we assemble our panel, Amy Morris has world and national news from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. We want to tell you about that huge outage with Meta service. It appears to be resolved or resolving now. Facebook, Messenger, Instagram were all down this morning. Meta says the technical issue's been resolved. We're still watching it for you. President Biden, Republican Donald Trump facing the biggest day of the primary campaign on this Super Tuesday. Voters in 16 states and 1 territory casting those ballots. Much of the attention is being focused now on Trump and his Republican challenger, Nikki Haley. Greg Valliere is chief U.S. policy strategist at AGF Investments and says this may be the end of the line for Haley.
It's awfully hard to see her staying in. It's a battle, as you know, for delegates, and she's just doing very poorly on delegates. If he can claim that 30% of the party likes her and would vote for her, but that is not going to get her the nomination.
865 Republican delegates are up for grabs tonight. 1,215 are needed to clinch. Haley rallied last night in Fort Worth, Texas.
It's not normal when Joe Biden calls his opponents fascists and Donald Trump calls his opponents vermin. None of that is normal.
Texas is holding an open primary. Haley kind of hoping that some Democrats might make the switch in a protest against Donald Trump. But so far, she's only won D.C.'s Republican primary. Listen for our special coverage of Super Tuesday results tonight to Bloomberg's Joe Matthew on a Balance of Power special starting at 8 o'clock tonight, Wall Street time. And the head of Russia's space agency now saying it is working on plans with China to deliver and install a nuclear power plant on the moon by 2035. Global news 24 hours a day whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Want to update you on the outage at Meta Platforms. Meta now says it has resolved the technical issues that disrupted service for hundreds of thousands of people across its family of social media apps, including Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Issues, though, are still reported on other social media sites, including YouTube and X. Meta Platform shares, they're down today. Part of a broader tech sell-off. We're looking at Meta down now by 1.2%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all declining right now. S&P lower by 45, down 0.9%. Stocks under pressure as a trio of tech heavyweights slid, and traders were wading through mixed economic data in the run-up to Jay Powell's testimony to Congress beginning tomorrow. The Dow down 280, drop there of 0.7%. NASDAQ down 250, a decline right now of 1.5%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down by 0.4%. 10-year at 4.15%, the 2-year 4.56%. Spot gold climbing 0.7%, now at 21.29. Did see a record on gold today. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, 78.57 a barrel. Bitcoin trading above 69,000 before retreating. Bitcoin now down 3.8%, 64,895. Fresh data today on the American service industry activity. It did come in below Wall Street's forecast. So with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Blame it on the labor market. The ISM Service Industry Index fell in February, even though orders held up, signaling slower growth. The index has pointed to expansion for more than a year. However, corporate job cut announcements have been rising of late. The government issues monthly employment data Friday. Economists anticipate slower payroll growth. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
After earnings, GitLab shares down now by 19.7%. Among the names reporting after the close of trading today, we will be hearing from CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike shares right now down by 6.9%. Recapping, not such a super Tuesday on Wall Street. S&P down 46, drop there of 0.9%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington, and once again, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, we do thank you. We'll get back with Charlie a bit later on this hour. Keep you posted on trading, of course, on Wall Street, even as we focus on politics on this program every day. And, well, this is the day of days, right? Super Tuesday, the biggest day of voting in the cycle. But the first question Tom Keene asked me this morning was whether it was still super. Because a lot of folks are looking at this as a coronation. Jennifer Nassour earlier this hour would passionately disagree with that, but there are real questions about the path for Nikki Haley. Is she actually going to win something tonight? Could she somehow turn this around? Mathematically, that is looking pretty darn close to impossible right now, even though the magic number is 12-15. I get that. But you've got over a third of delegates up for grabs on the line here tonight, and Donald Trump has a commanding lead across the country, certainly in the big states that count. And that's where we start with our panel. What to watch tonight? We've got a great one for you, too. Rick Davis is with us, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist, joined today by Brad Howard, back with us here on Balance of Power. Democratic analyst, now Corcoran Street Group. Brad, welcome back. Rick, good to see you. Rick Davis, I want to start with what you're watching tonight, because we're looking at 15 states, at least for Republicans, in nominating contests. A lot of them are considered foregone at this point. How will you decipher the news? How should our listeners interpret what's happening when we start talking again about this around 8 o'clock tonight?
Yeah, look, I'm looking for, sort of Trump weaknesses in states where, Nikki Haley may be very competitive. You've talked about those before in Vermont, in Virginia, maybe a little bit in Massachusetts, as you were just talking to the former state party chair, maybe Maine. Susan Collins endorsed there. That might carry some weight. I mean, some of those numbers, from what I'm seeing in recent polls that just came out today, indicate that could be a contest, right? I mean, that would be really interesting. We don't want to be bored tonight. We want to have something to look at. And I think those are the places to look. I would also say, the down ballot stuff is always interesting to political junkies like me. And so I'm watching races in California, like you said, the Senate race, a couple of congressional races in Texas, which are fascinating to me. And so there'll be a few of those things to talk about.
I wonder what your thoughts are in the early going today, Brad, what you care about tonight. Certainly when it comes to the presidential race, does Nikki Haley need to actually win something? Do these northeastern states count for her?
Yeah, I mean, yes, for morale reasons, really, and to keep her donors happy, she does need to notch a few wins, but also mathematically, any real shot at getting the nomination, she's got to do more than just have some symbolic victories tonight. She's got to really ratchet up the delegates. So short of a Hail Mary miracle here, I just don't see, she may get the symbolic victory tonight in one or two places, but certainly not when no one's expecting a Nikki Haley sweep of Super Tuesday. In fact, just the opposite. I think most of us are anticipating that President Trump gets very, very close to outright clinching the GOP nomination. He's well on his way to being the nominee for the Republican Party once again. And so, we'll see if she can eke out a symbolic victory and set her up nicely for 28, but the cards aren't there for tonight, I don't think.
Rick, will you be looking at margins in some of the early calls like Alabama, specifically North Carolina, just to get a sense of what the rest of the night will look like for Trump?
Yeah, those are two places that you want to see if Nikki Haley can get above 20%, right? Those are you pick two of the worst states for Nikki Haley, so
for sure.
Yeah, it's not much to get excited about early on. It's really going to be tomorrow morning when we're looking at a lot of the action that will tell us, is there a narrative out there that Nikki Haley's donors could get comfortable with to put more money into her campaign and convince her not to get out, right? I mean, like, you're going to have both in the right ear, donors and other operatives saying, stay in, collect delegates, see what the future brings. And then you'll have others in the left ear saying, preserve your integrity as a candidate. You've done a lot. You've increased your name ID nationally. You're a player in the party now. Go out on a good footing. It's an awful debate. I've been through it many times, and deciding what to do if you're Nikki Haley is one of the toughest things that she's going to do in her career as far as making a decision.
Yeah, I don't suspect we're going to find out tonight, but who knows? We'll be live if she does. Brad, I want to ask you about Minnesota, Minneapolis specifically, a big progressive base that we're told could stage some sort of protest vote like we saw the uncommitted vote in Michigan over concern about Joe Biden's policy on Israel and Gaza. Is that real? I'll ask again this time around, or is this the media looking for something to talk about?
I mean, it's not going to have any actual implications on Joe Biden's path to the nomination. I mean, he's going to be the nominee, period. Part of me feels a little bit like, get it out of your system now and then rally behind our nominee. And let's do this and win in November, because the true irony of this situation is, if you're not fully backing President Biden, like if you stay home in November, or you decide you're gonna get back at Joe Biden for his policy and I'm not gonna vote for him, you will elect the most anti-Muslim president we've ever had in our history and will have once again. So you're doing yourself a dramatic disservice here. You're not punishing Joe Biden. You are punishing Muslim Americans. So my advice is, yes, protest, get it out of your system now, but let's get behind our guy and let's go win.
I've got less than a minute here, Rick. 10,000 uncommitted votes is the goal of the protest effort. Does it matter?
No, it doesn't matter a bit. I think it's just a distraction. It didn't matter in Michigan. Our own poll showed while all that was going on, Biden's numbers were going up in the state of Michigan. So I think it's a real distraction. It's a media fixation. And I think the Biden folks are not spending 10 seconds worrying about it. They'll put teams on the ground in Michigan to shore up the Arab American vote there because it's substantial. But outside of that, uncommitted votes in Washington State, give me a break. Washington State is going to be electoral votes, Joe Biden.
Yeah, there you go. And in the case of Minnesota, Biden won by 7 percentage points in 2020. We'll be watching tonight how he does, of course, in the Democratic primary. But all eyes are really on the Republican contest. That's where we're going to be later. And coming up, the jungle primary, another fascinating part of the storyline tonight. If you're a political junkie, look no further than California. Rick Davis, Brad Howard will have more on this coming up next, because Adam Schiff could have a race on his hands. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Macy's shares, they are higher now by 0.1% after Arkhouse Management and Brigade Capital Management boosted their offer for Macy's yesterday by 14%. The retailer says it is reviewing the offer. Gabriel Kahana is Arkhouse's CEO, and he spoke this morning with Bloomberg Radio.
We sincerely hope that they really do carefully review it in good faith, as they should have almost, I guess more than 3 months ago at this point, our initial offer. And we also think that Macy's shareholders, in that statement, Macy's executives are telling shareholders they don't need to do anything right now. Our view is that Macy's shareholders own this company, and they should do something, which is reach out to their directors, reach out to their executives, and urge them to engage sincerely and in good faith with our credible buyer group.
And Macy's shares right now are higher by about 0.2%. Elsewhere in the retailing industry, Target's fourth quarter profit beat estimates as the retailer continued its improvements in inventory management and said its decline in traffic slowed. Today, Target now surging by 12.2%. Target, meanwhile, is launching a new paid membership program, moving to catch up with rivals whose own subscription plans are well established, thinking Walmart and Amazon. Tesla lowered today following disappointing China vehicle shipment numbers. Tesla shares tumbling now by 3.7%. And U.S. officials have told AMD Advanced Micro Devices its AI chip that it tailored for the Chinese market is too powerful to sell without a license from the Commerce Department. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Balance of Power with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
You know you're onto something when the Democratic frontrunner in California spends $10 million on ads to try to get a Republican into the race. Only in California, the jungle primary. This is the race for Senate, by the way, the primary race, but you don't have a Democratic contest and a Republican one. They just take the top two. And so Congressman Adam Schiff, who's been the front runner largely in this contest, has been spending money to try to elevate Steve Garvey, the ball player, the former World Series champion Dodger. And it's been working. It is quite possible now that as he warns California that this man is too conservative, that he's in fact going to be in a second place position for the general election. Schiff versus Garvey. So much for Katie Porter. We'll find out. Let's assemble the panel and get their take on it. Rick Davis is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist, joined today by Brad Howard, who is back with us today, Democratic analyst. As we look ahead to the jungle primary, Brad is now at Corcoran Street Group. Good strategy, Brad, for Adam Schiff. He spent a lot of money on this potential outcome.
Well, it has a lot of upside here, right? If you can keep a Democrat from advancing to the November ballot and you make this a D versus R race in November rather than a D plus D race, there's a lot of benefits there, right? The entire party rallies behind you. All the outside money comes pouring in from the Democratic base. And not to mention the odds of a Republican winning statewide on the Senate race in California are very, minimal. But this has got to work for Adam Schiff. If the Republican does advance, Adam Schiff better beat him in November.
Yeah, do I have this right, Rick? Did I frame this right, or is Adam Schiff really worried about Steve Garvey being too conservative for California?
Yeah, I don't think he's worried about it. I think he's dependent upon it, right? I mean, he's got $10 million bucks riding on the fact that Garvey is out of sync with the California voter. That being said, I mean, Garvey was a superstar on the Dodgers and the Padres. I mean, we forget Southern California, you can get some Republican vote out there. And so I don't know. I mean, I've seen polls all over the map on this. I think we can wake up and find out that there's any kind of a mix between Schiff, Porter, and Garvey in this combination. And what Schiff really has to worry about is that he plan and spent $10 million on Garvey that he probably should have spent on Katie Porter. I wouldn't count her out at this point, but we've only got one night to spend worrying about it. So what I prefer is Garvey on the ticket.
Yeah. Is Steve Garvey a good candidate, Rick? Is he good for the party? He's been signing baseballs and it seems like he's connecting with people.
He's a superstar. Anytime you get a celebrity to run for office, especially in a celebrity-focused state like California, you kind of get excited because you can pick up votes that aren't just doctrinaire Republicans. That's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got elected. He wasn't a Republican in that regard. He was a celebrity.
How about that?
The big difference there being.
What do you think, Brad? Adam Schiff is making a big bet here that California has to go Democrat. We've got less than a minute. Is that a worthy bet?
Are you asking me? Yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely all trends holding, and with Trump on the ballot, I do think the Democrats are locked in to win that Senate seat, no matter the outcome. I think the biggest note here is the continuing power and influence of Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi here, who endorsed Schiff early on, who's been connecting him to her money operation in the state of Florida, which is why he has $10 million to spend here to try to knock all the other Democrats out of the general election.
Fascinating. Brad Howard and Rick Davis with us today on this Super Tuesday. Many thanks to both of you for the analysis. They'll be back in our second hour as we continue to look at the races that we'll be watching tonight. Kaylee Lyons is on the way in next. Hour 2 of Balance of Power starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Washington, D.C.
Welcome to Super Tuesday and the fastest show in politics on the biggest day of voting until November. A third of delegates are up for grabs today in the states voting around the country. Will this be a coronation for Donald Trump? I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington, D.C. That's the big question here as we settle in for the long haul, Kaylee.
Yeah, indeed. Of course, Donald Trump can't actually get to the requisite 1,215 delegates he needs to officially secure the nomination tonight. The math just simply doesn't work that way. But what we could see if he sweeps all 15 of the states up for grabs today, many of them with winner-take-all delegates, essentially. They'd get all of them if Trump were to win. It means it would be also mathematically impossible for Nikki Haley to catch up with him in a meaningful way. And that's really the question. Will Nikki Haley and her campaign last beyond this evening?
We're going to talk about it with Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy, who's been on the campaign trail for months at this point, and with pollster David Paleologos at Suffolk University. Kaylee, his research has helped us find our way across the trail until this point now.
Absolutely. And of course, as always, Charlie Pellet helps us find our way across financial markets. And he got a check on that for us right now. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Kaylee. And not such a super day on Wall Street. Indeed, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000. They are all trading lower right now. We have got a trio of tech heavyweights helping drag markets lower, specifically Apple, Tesla, Advanced Micro Devices. Right now, the S&P is trading lower by 44 points, close to session lows, down 0.9%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 295 points now, drop of 0.8%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 250, lower now by 1.5%. The NASDAQ 100 Index down 1.7%. Russell 2000 down by 0.4%. 10-year 4.14%, with a 2-year now at 4.56%. Spot gold up 0.8%. 21.30 the ounce, a retreat for crude, lower by 0.6%. West Texas Intermediate right now 78.25 a barrel. Now Bitcoin did surge to a record for the first time in more than 2 years earlier today, yet the original cryptocurrency did not stay at that all-time high for very long. Bitcoin was above $69,000 before retreating. Right now we have got Bitcoin trading lower by 3.3%. Bitcoin at 65,283. Bottom line, red on the screen, it is a down day with the S&P 500 index down 45 right now, down 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet in New York. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Joe Matthew and Kayla Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with our check on these Tuesday markets. Of course, not just any Tuesday, but Super Tuesday indeed, as you join us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. It's going to be a long evening, Joe, of course, because it will actually be well into tomorrow Eastern time when the last polls close in Alaska. But we kind of have a sense, we think, of how ultimately this is going to end, which essentially is the general election contest for all intents and purposes beginning.
That's right. We kind of said that coming out of New Hampshire, and this has been seen as a bit anticlimactic, but the math will be impossible to ignore. It appears after tonight, Kaylee, if the polls are correct and Donald Trump has the commanding lead that he currently enjoys on paper, to your point earlier, it'll be mathematically impossible for Nikki Haley to pull this off. So the question is, why would you keep going? And we'll help to answer that together, I guess, over the coming days.
Yeah, of course, we have the consideration that financially, she very well could. She's still pulling in millions of dollars from donors, but will people still be willing to throw good money at her if she has no real clear path to the nomination? Would donors continue if it's just in case money, essentially, if it's just a question of whether or not Trump is ultimately going to be able to serve as the nominee, depending on what happens in his myriad legal cases.
Well, that's true. And after we heard from the Supreme Court on the issue of immunity, there might not be a just-in-case strategy for her. Let's bring in Gregory Cordy now, Bloomberg News politics reporter who's been steeped in all things campaign since long before the voting started. Happy Super Tuesday, sir. Is it the feeling super to you, or is this coronation?
It's feeling like anticlimactic Tuesday. And you know, the Super Tuesdays have come in all different kinds of flavors over the years, right? Sometimes they're a little earlier, sometimes they're a little later, sometimes they're competitive on one side but not the other. This one seems especially like we have front-loaded a lot of the primaries where we know the outcome of this. But we have one candidate, Nikki Haley, who is committed to playing out the string at least through Super Tuesday. I love it because as a data guy, it gives me more data points to really sort of, it's a check on the polls, right, to see how reliable the polls have been, how strong this anti-Trump sentiment is from within the Republican Party. We get to test a lot of hypotheses as we go deeper into this, the primaries, but one thing we're not looking for tonight is any sort of indication of who the Republican nominee is. I think we know that already.
Well, we spoke with one of Nikki Haley's perhaps most vocal surrogates, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, yesterday, after Nikki Haley had said in a few interviews that she would stay in the race if she were to be competitive. She didn't define what competitive means. He was a little reluctant to define what it means, though he did point to the fact that she's gotten north of 40% in states like his state, New Hampshire, north of 20% in others. And I wonder if those numbers aren't as meaningful really for Nikki Haley, because it doesn't change the outcome if she's not winning states in terms of the delegate math for the most part, but more influential when it comes to thinking about Donald Trump's strength as a candidate. Because if you have 20 to 40% of the Republican primary electorate choosing not you, what does that signal as you head into a really long general election battle with an incumbent?
Yeah, and one of the things that I looked at yesterday, I looked at the polling averages from 538 going into each of these early contests, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Michigan. And in each one of them, Nikki Haley overperformed the expectations. And in at least New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Michigan, significantly so, by 4, 5, 6 points. And so that, I think, is part of what's fueling her campaign, is that she gets a little bit of bounce every time she does it. Obviously, it's not helping her with picking up delegates. Super Tuesday is where the rubber is going to meet the road here, because if she doesn't pick up a significant amount of delegates tonight, it looks like Trump will be on track to clinch the nomination. He can't clinch it mathematically tonight, but he can by March 12th at the earliest. If she does well, she can push that date back to March 19th. But that's as much as she can do, really. But look, there's two reasons why candidates drop out. One is they run out of money, and the other is they want a job in the next administration. Nikki Haley continues to raise money, and it looks like she's foreclosed working for President Trump again. She was, of course, his UN ambassador in the first Trump administration. And so she, at this point, doesn't really have much motivation to drop out.
So maybe you've got that whole sort of halo effect as a candidate in waiting, insurgent candidate, something like that. Can she keep that on a low boil until 2028?
I think that will depend on how well former President Trump does in November. If Joe Biden wins, despite all of the weaknesses we all know that Joe Biden has, then I think there's going to be some serious soul searching in the Republican Party, and Nikki Haley can come and say, look, I was the one who told you so. We need to rebuild this party as a new post-Trump party, and I'm the person to do that. If Trump wins, I don't know that I see quite that opportunity for her, because then a Trump win in November would fully cement the Trump takeover of the Republican Party, and that we will be more likely to see candidates in that MAGA mold going forward from Republicans.
All right, Gregory Cordy, as always, covering all things politics for us here at Bloomberg, going to join us on what is going to be a very long day this Super Tuesday. Gregory, thank you so much. And we want to turn now to another person who is following all of these races across the country very closely. David Paleologos is joining us now from Suffolk University, where he is the director of their Political Research Center. David, great to have you on the show. We were just hearing from Gregory about a number of states in which, sure, Nikki Haley did not win the Republican contest, but she did perform better than expected. If that were to show up anywhere tonight, where would you expect Nikki Haley to possibly outperform?
If it were to show up, she would probably do better in Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Virginia. Those are the states that I would be looking at. The other states, less so. And maybe Utah, too.
You're up there in New England, David. You have a sense of Republican politics in a state like Massachusetts, or look north to Vermont or Maine. This tells us a lot when we're looking to New England states to gauge the strength of a Republican candidate, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when was the last time electoral votes were won by a Republican in any of those states? Maybe in one congressional district in Maine. And where you have independents who can vote, then you have a recipe for a possible upset. But even in our polling, and which was over a month ago, so it's old. Trump was still prevailing in Massachusetts, and he's heavily favored to win. I wouldn't be surprised if he was around 1,000 by the end of the night, and Haley was in the 100 and something, 25 or 150 at best. So you're looking at, no matter how you slice it, you're looking at a 7, 8, 9 to 1 ratio of Trump delegates to Haley delegates.
Well, David, of course, Nikki Haley, when we've heard her campaigning recently, is she's committed to stay in the race through at least today's contest. She has said, look at the numbers that I'm polling. I understand, being an accountant, that 40% is not 50%, but 40% is not a small number. I'm paraphrasing words she spoke after South Carolina, her home state, where she was still resoundingly defeated by Trump. But when we think about that number she is referring to, those individuals that are picking her over Trump in this primary contest, where are they likely to go in a general election? Is it as problematic for a Trump general election candidacy as we might think?
We won't know that until the numbers settle, until after Nikki Haley, gets out of the race. It depends state to state. I mean, some states where Democrats were voting, they were never going to vote for Trump. They were just meddling. In the case of independents, left-leaning independents were probably not going to vote Republican. So you really have to isolate those subsets to pure independents or right-leaning independents. And the answer to your question is they could not vote. They could vote for Joe Biden, or more likely they could vote third party.
What are you going to be looking at then when we get through that first time zone, David? We've got the two most populous states involved here in Texas and California. That's where Donald Trump starts to put this in the bag, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more the night wears on, the worse it's going to be for Haley. And I've heard today recently that Haley has canceled a couple of appearances today, campaign stops, and she's settled back into South Carolina. That, to me, is a signal, and Joe, you know this better than anybody, that she's
crafting a speech, whatever that speech says. They're working on, a speech to set herself up for whatever lies ahead in the future, whether it's 2028 or something else.
Are you surprised nothing's scheduled tonight? We understand she has not scheduled a speech, David. Does that mean if you hear of a late announcement, that might be significant?
Yeah, no, I haven't heard of an announcement, but I've heard that she is pulled back today from some of her appearances. She is in South Carolina, and she is presumably working on her next her strategy. Either she's in talks with funders to find out whether or not what's the best case scenario for them to stay in financially or not. But obviously, she doesn't want to be distracted by doing a couple of events and making a poor career decision. So they're probably, sort of taking a deep breath. She's circling with her inner advisors to figure out what the best approach is.
Well, as you talk about potential other strategies she could pursue, I wonder if that could theoretically include a third party, which you were just referencing. Some Nikki Haley primary voters may end up voting for a third party come the general in November. We know No Labels has been interested in her. Nikki Haley seems to have suggested that she doesn't have interest in it in return, but No Labels has consistently said, David, that Super Tuesday, after that, is when they make the call whether they're going to run a unity ticket. Do you see a path for them?
For No Labels, I mean, I see a path for any third-party candidate to harness significant amounts of votes in swing states to turn the election. No Labels being one, RFK Jr. being one, Green Party being one, Libertarian, and Cornel West. And it really depends on what candidates, parties make what state ballots, because we know from 2016 and 2020 that the presence of third-party candidates directly impacted the outcome. I have to take Nikki Haley at her word that she's not going to pursue a No Labels option because she's a Republican. The moment she does that, then any future within the Republican infrastructure is pretty much gone. And I don't know that she wants to risk that at her age right now.
We're spending some time with David Paleologos, the Suffolk University Political Research Center director, on this Super Tuesday. A little later this hour, David, we're going to bring our conversation with Chris Sununu. He's obviously in a delicate situation here, talking about a candidate who may have some very difficult decisions to make. What is his political legacy here for backing Nikki Haley so passionately, speaking against Donald Trump openly, as a term-limited governor now going into the next chapter of his career?
I got to believe that people may say he comes off as a loser. I think he's one of the big winners of 2024 personally. And I don't know him. It's not, a personal thing. But I'm just looking at what he did in New Hampshire for her was amazing. To bring her literally within 11 points of Donald Trump in New Hampshire was an amazing feat coming off of Iowa. I mean, they identified neighborhood by neighborhood every independent that was anti-Trump and pulled them out. That kind of feat, forget Washington, D.C., and forget even her home state where she didn't even get 40%. In South Carolina, as I recall, she did better in New Hampshire. So what he did in New Hampshire, I take my hat off to him. I think he comes off as being loyal to her and to his own principles. And I think he sets himself up potentially for opportunities. It may not be in 2028, but it could be also.
All right, David Paleologos joining us from Suffolk University. Thank you so much, as always. It was such an interesting conversation, Joe, with Chris Sununu, the governor, last night. Essentially still defending Nikki Haley staunchly, saying that she is his candidate. He's still very much backing her, and yet still says that he will support Trump should he be the Republican nominee. Despite, what did he say to us? Trump kicking dirt in the face of Republicans everywhere?
Yeah, we'll bring you a bit of that conversation coming up a little bit later on this hour of Balance of Power with the governor of New Hampshire. Be curious to hear what he's thinking tomorrow, Kaylee. Yeah. First, our panel, Rick Davis is going to be with us coming up here in a special Super Tuesday panel with Brad Howard. Races to watch tonight. They'll lay out the roadmap, Haley.
Yeah, it's not just presidential. There's a lot down ballot to consider as well. So we'll have more on that next. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 121 on Wall Street. Stocks are very close to session lows right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ very much in the red. Stocks under pressure as traders wade through mixed economic data in the run-up to Jay Powell's testimony to Congress beginning tomorrow. And, of course, Friday, the jobs report. Right now, the S&P is down 47 at 5,083, a loss today of 0.9%. Dow Industrials down 0.8% right now, lower by 314 points, while the NASDAQ Composite Index now down 267 points, a drop now of 1.65%. 10-year, 4.14%. The 2-year, 4.56%. Spot gold up 0.8%, 21.30 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.8%, 78.12 a barrel on crude. Bitcoin cannot ignore the volatility there today. Was trading above a record, just above $69,000 right now. Bitcoin is down 4% at 64,790. Target's fourth quarter profit beat estimates as the retailer continued its improvements in inventory management. It also said its decline in traffic slowed. Right now, we've got Target shares up.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
Democratic analyst is here too. Gentlemen, great to have you with us on Super Tuesday. Rick, the down ballot races, I think where Kaylee's going here, will likely be a lot more interesting than what we see on the presidential level. Is that all you need to know going into this Super Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, you actually don't know what the outcome's going to be on these down ballot races. We know what the outcome's going to be in the presidential primaries. So there at least is some mystique involved in the down ballot.
All right, so Brad, if you could pick a down ballot contest, which one is going to be the most interesting, perhaps the most telling of the general feeling going into November? As we know, there's also some primaries that have a more MAGA-oriented Trump-backed candidate against more establishment candidates. What's going to be the tell?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Alabama 1 right there. You've got it's the first member-on-member primary this cycle because of redistricting. There's a new seat there. I'm also watching who emerges out of that new seat because that will be a relatively competitive general election, that new Alabama seat. So we'll see who emerges on the Democratic side there to see who's going to take on whoever the Republicans nominate. But in that Alabama 1 seat, you've got Jerry Carl versus Barry Moore, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Freedom Caucus on one side, Chamber of Commerce, traditional Republicans on the other. That'll be a fascinating one to watch for sure.
That new seat you mentioned is important. At least 11 candidates fighting for this newly drawn district. Rick Davis, you know Alabama politics pretty well. This is a seat that would have been won easily by Joe Biden in 2020 by more than 10 points, it appears. Who are you looking at?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, anytime you've got that many people running in a new district, you know, it's just anybody's guess. I think that the one I'm watching is in Texas. Sheila Jackson Lee, her opponent Amanda Edwards. They know each other really well. They've worked together. Sheila Jackson ran for mayor and did really poorly and has made her vulnerable. And I think she could be one of the highest profile incumbents going down.
All right, so clearly a lot to watch outside of the presidential contest tonight. But of course, the presidential contest, as we know, gentlemen, is going to be what's making most of the headlines. And on that note, I want to point to a note that came into my inbox from Terry Haynes over at Pangea Policy, someone we speak to frequently here on Bloomberg TV and radio, who writes that Trump has the same four problems after Super Tuesday that he had before it. Rick, he says, an enthusiastic base that hasn't grown since 2020, a split Republican Party that's now all but embedded, independents aren't for him, and Trump encourages all of it. Do you agree with that assessment, Rick?
Yeah, that sounds pretty realistic. I mean, Terry's a very smart guy, and I wouldn't doubt him on that. But those elements are all there and makes it, you know, a very interesting contest.
Be very curious to hear about Joe Biden, because we're not talking about him too much today. Brad, there's a storyline in Minnesota, of course, about a potential protest vote. But he's in primary contests across the country, just like Donald Trump is. Should he be speaking tonight? He could deliver some sort of victory address and warm up for the State of the Union, no?
I mean, if he would like to, I think if I'm his prep team, I've got his head in the State of the Union, which is much more consequential. As we all know, the number of live events that Americans all kind of tune in to watch has dramatically declined.
Sure.
But as we saw, there's an appetite for it. We saw the Super Bowl highest ratings ever. I think this may be one of the highest ratings ever for a State of the Union because so much is at risk for the president. He's got complex situations over abroad. He's got a hyper-partisan environment here at home. There's a new speaker that's going to stand behind him. So there's a lot at stake here for the president. He's got to both shore up his base, show strength abroad, and lay out an agenda for another term. And so he's got to keep his head there where it matters. And one quick thing on the Democratic base on the protest votes here. You looked at Michigan. Sure. Yeah, there were 13 that voted for non-committed. Back in 2012, Obama, 11% voted non-committed in Michigan. And of course, Obama went on to win not only Michigan, but the presidency. So let's keep things in historical perspective.
Yeah, but of course, we're talking about percentage of the overall vote, and the actual numbers were a little bit bigger in Biden's case this time around. And also, while we're talking about that uncommitted vote in Michigan and how it could translate elsewhere, it wasn't just in places like Dearborn, concentrated with, heavily Muslim and Arab American populations. It was also Ann Arbor and East Lansing. I keep coming back to this point. Michigan State, the University of Michigan. Brad, does he still have a problem with young people? And what does that mean for him in a general election contest?
Look, young voters are tricky. You've got they are fairly new to the electorate. They really don't care what you've done previously. They want to know what you're going to do moving forward. They are idealistic. They are energized. You've got to have them not only vote for you, but you got to have they're the ground troops that are out there knocking on doors and getting you votes. So they're a tricky bunch. And overall, this is the time when our base likes to vent its frustration as they should. Right? By nature of being a progressive, you're never happy. You're never satisfied with the status quo. You're always wanting more, bigger, and bolder. And so by nature, there's some unrest always with a Democratic president this time in the cycle. My hope is that by November, that the Biden campaign is really taking the youth vote seriously, is really find ways to engage, to not only persuade them and consolidate them, but also utilize their passions and energy to help win in November.
It is interesting. Joe Biden's just getting back to the White House today from Camp David. This is
long weekend.
All about the State of the Union. Rick, is that smart business? It's not worth it to put him out in front of people tonight. Focus on Thursday.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, this is the latest State of the Union I think I can ever recall. And frankly, the speaker's gotten a lot of criticism from his caucus by giving Joe Biden this incredible backstop to Super Tuesday. Here, their plan was to have Donald Trump basically proclaim the presumptive nominee tonight. And now they're going to let Biden steal the show with the State of the Union a day later. So I think that this is exactly what Brad said. I think this is the whole game for him is State of the Union. He's going to have tens of millions of people watching this speech. Could be the most consequential speech of this term, and certainly the most consequential speech that he's going to give between now and the convention. And so this one, he's got to get right. And realizing that prep is what prep is, I never expected him to be bouncing around Super Tuesday states 2 days before State of the Union.
Well, Rick, as you talk about maybe the speaker having given Biden something of a gift to be able to give an address like this right on the heels of Super Tuesday, could he also take something away from the president if the House actually passes this package of funding bills to avert a shutdown come Friday? Does Biden lose a talking point over congressional dysfunction?
Well, they're only going to get 6 of the 12 passed by then.
Fair enough.
And so it's not like you've got to really scramble to find dysfunction in the House Republicans. And I think that's one thing I'm really looking for is how much he uses this B-team speaker and House dysfunction in his State of the Union. I think it's unavoidable. He has got to point out the biggest limitation to progress in his agenda has been this crew in the House.
Great panel on Super Tuesday. Thanks to both of you, Rick Davis and Brad Howard. We'll be back with Rick a little bit later on this evening, and I want to remind everybody that we have special coverage coming up. Kaylee, it starts 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Radio and on YouTube here on Bloomberg Radio and Television starting at 9 p.m., and we'll be going pretty late tonight as we follow through 6 time zones, if my count is correct.
I believe
It's
that
gonna
is
be an
correct.
interesting escapade.
We will be on air until
A
11
marathon.
p.m.
That's right.
Washington time, hence why we are caffeinating throughout the day today.
Always.
But of course, we could get calls potentially as early as the 7 o'clock hour, Joe, because that's when
That's right.
polls are going to close in Vermont and Virginia, right? And
Exactly.
If history is a guide, we've been getting race calls on the Republican side within, what, a minute?
01. It'll
after
be
poll closure?
7:01 most likely. And at 8:01, we'll have another round for you. So when you
Yes.
join us this evening, we'll be starting with breaking news. It might feel predictable, but we, of course, like to wait until the votes are counted. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington alongside Kaylee Lyons, and we want to bring you up to date before our conversation with New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu on world and national news. Amy Morris has that for us in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Thanks. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urging Hamas leaders to agree to a ceasefire deal that would free hostages and halt the war in Gaza, even as he called on Israel to let in more humanitarian aid.
We have an opportunity for an immediate ceasefire that can bring hostages home, that can dramatically increase the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Palestinians who so desperately need it, and can also set the conditions for an enduring resolution. And it is on Hamas to make decisions about whether it is prepared to engage in that ceasefire.
Blinken spoke earlier today alongside the Qatari prime minister, who was in Washington for meetings as part of a broader U.S.-Qatar strategic dialogue. Qatar has played a key role in as a mediator in efforts to win agreements from Israel and Hamas. Voters in 16 states and 1 territory heading to the polls on this Super Tuesday. Greg Vallier, the chief U.S. policy strategist at AGF Investments, tells us you may want to see a change in Donald Trump moving forward. He explains that he might be more contrite with his former Republican rivals. Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons co-hosting a special edition of Balance of Power starting tonight at 8 on Bloomberg Radio and YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks trading lower. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. As a matter of fact, S&P right now very close to session lows. S&P down 49, drop now of 1%. Dow Industrials down 310, down 0.8%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 282, a decline of 1.7%. We've got a trio of technology heavyweights sliding. Traders are also wading through mixed economic data in the run-up to Jay Powell's testimony to Congress. The 10-year, 4.14%. The 2-year right now, 4.55%. Gold, spot gold up 0.8%, 21.30 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.8%. WTI 78.11. Bitcoin was trading at a record above $69,000. A retreat right now. Bitcoin down 4.4%, $64,500 on Bitcoin. Apple's iPhone woes in China are deepening. Advanced Micro Devices has hit a U.S. roadblock in selling an AI chip to the Asian nation. And Tesla is extending its slide as China shipments slumped. Apple down today by 2.84%. We've got AMD down 1.5%. Tesla now slumping by 3.5%. Again, recapping, a lot of red on the screen here with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining, and the 10-year yielding 4.14%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Back we go to Washington. Balance of Power continues, and once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie, we thank you as always on this Super Tuesday. Welcome to the fastest show in politics, Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in the nation's capital. As we look, Kaylee, across the country, 15 states holding Republican contests. 11 of them are open to more than just registered Republicans. Yeah. And that's been the narrative so far until now by the Nikki Haley campaign. These are the types of states that she could potentially outperform in. And we spent some time with her chief surrogate, the governor of New Hampshire.
Yeah, Chris Sununu did join us yesterday evening on the eve of Super Tuesday, and we talked to him about the math because, Joe, you're absolutely right. There are a number of states in which independently minded voters could work in her favor, but the problem is only 2 states are not winner take all. Right. So whoever gets more than 50% of the vote, which if polling is correct, looks very likely to be Donald Trump, gets all the delegates. Therefore, the math becomes really difficult if she's trying to secure the nomination. And we posed that question to Governor Sununu. If it's not actually about getting the number of delegates to secure the nomination, if that's not mathematically possible, why is Haley staying in this race? Here's his response.
The reason to stay in the race is to collect enough delegates to be president. That's Nikki's mission. That's it. She's not here to make a point. She's not putting herself on the line, spending all this energy, all this exhaustion away from her family, being out there every single day tirelessly, for anything other than being president and getting this country back on track. And that's exactly what you want to see. So, no, it's not about some of these other candidates who get in just to try to make a point or sell a book or whatever the heck it is. Nikki is about focusing on this country and what she can bring to the table, not just from the country's perspective, but as a Republican. I love the fact that she doesn't just win, she wins handily against Joe Biden. She brings senators and new House members and governorships all with her. She wins up and down the ballot. Trump cannot do that.
Ambassador Haley signaled yesterday she might not endorse Donald Trump in an interview on Meet the Press, that she no longer sees herself bound to a pledge to an RNC that she sees changing here. Of course, it is changing as we speak, Governor. Do you support that decision? Do you feel the same way?
Well, she didn't say she wouldn't. She's definitely not going to. So she didn't say that. When the press is asking you as a candidate if you're going to support the person you're running against, it's a ridiculous question, right? To say, oh yeah, by the way, and I'll support the person I'm running against.
I'm trying to be careful. She signaled that she might not. I'm trying to be fair here, Governor. She signaled she might not.
Look, yeah, sure. Yeah, she said she might not. And again, it's a ridiculous question also because is Trump, has he committed to supporting the Republican nominee if it's not him?
I think you know the answer.
Of course he
to that.
hasn't. Yeah, of course. So it's this faux outrage. I can't believe that she won't answer the question or be clear about it when Trump has gotten away with completely, kicking dirt in the face of the Republican Party across this country, kind of making his own rules as he goes, but he gets away with it. So, look, at the end of the day, I mean, Nikki will decide what Nikki's going to do. Regardless of who the nominee is, you're going to see a lot of folks understand that Joe Biden doesn't
is not the future of America, right? I mean, that's a real problem for a whole variety of reasons. We could do an hour on a show about why that's a problem. There's a reason why Trump, actually is neck and neck with Biden. The problem is, again, it's not just about who wins the presidency. It's about who brings the rest of the party over the line. And I keep going back to that, but it's so important. We're tired of, as Republicans, we are tired of losing. And we lost in 20. We lost in 22. We lost with Trump as the standard bearer and kind of the front end and the messenger of the party, his type of candidates, his style. That is complete losing for the Republican Party. So he could snake by, I guess, but Nikki would win it in droves. At the end of the day, I thought it was kind of funny that they would even ask her the question, because she's still very much in this race. She's still fighting hard. A couple days from Super Tuesday, and all she's trying to do is get more voters out. Every new voter that comes out that typically might not vote in a primary that comes out on Super Tuesday is likely a Nikki Haley voter. So getting the vote out, not just kind of to push back against this concerted base that Trump has, and that's understandable given that he's an incumbent president. But every new voter she can drive out is another bit of opportunity, and that's all you're thinking about as a candidate. How do you win?
Well, what about what you're thinking about as a surrogate? Because, Governor, you've been asked the question. In fact, Joe and I have asked it of you when we were up in New Hampshire in January, this idea that you would support Trump should he be the Republican nominee as an alternative to Joe Biden. As you just described him as someone kicking dirt in the face of Republicans, I believe there is a very real chance he could be convicted of a felony in the not-so-distant future. Is there anything that would change your mind on that?
Right now, no. Look, I want a strong ticket, and my focus is going to be. I'm not going to be governor. I've done my 4 terms here. I'm deciding to step down. My focus is always going to be, in New Hampshire, and I'm just kind of speaking where my position as a governor. I think you can translate it to 49 other states. Party leaders and folks that are elected are going to focus really hard on their states. The problem with Trump is that he's not going to be able to raise money because he's already spent, $60 million on his legal fees, probably another $50 million to go. His people have now co-opted and are now running the RNC. So, again, who's going to give the RNC money knowing that a lot of that money might just go to pay off his legal fees? It's going to put a lot of pressure on candidates to raise money into their own PACs, into their own organizations, where typically they might have relied on the RNC for help. I just don't see that as actually being there. So, look, I'm going to support the Republican Party, the Republican ticket as strong as I can. I'm a conservative. I believe in those ideals. I'm very optimistic about the Republican Party. Whether Trump's there or not, there's still a lot of opportunity to get things right in this country, to get back to believing that the individual comes first, not a bunch of liberal elitists in Washington that are standing on the shoulders of American families that built this country, defend this country, but are being told how to live their lives. People are absolutely sick and tired of it. So the Republican Party has a huge opportunity to have candidates, not just who's running for president, but have candidates up and down the ballot that connect with that and say, we're going to actively make a change. We're not just going to go and raise more money, try to get ourselves reelected, but we're going to be an active part of a positive process that gets this country back on track.
The governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, speaking with us yesterday, and wanted to make sure that you heard that conversation here on Bloomberg as Nikki Haley stares down the barrel of 15 more contests this evening, and it's difficult to tell where she might go from here. Kaylee, NBC News is reporting. Of course, we know she's back in the Charleston area. The staff at the headquarters in good spirits today. The songs of choice are "Sisters Are Doing It for Themselves" and "Started from the Bottom."
Now we're here is the line that typically.
I thought you'd be ready for that.
Typically follows. But it brings me back to New Hampshire, Joe. Remember, we were all set to go. We were there on the ground. We were going to go to a Ron DeSantis event one afternoon. And it turned out he wasn't even in the state of New Hampshire. He was in Florida and then dropped his speech that he was leaving the race. And of course, that is what we're on watch for. There is no signal directly from Nikki Haley that she'd be leaving the race after these contests, but she hasn't signaled the same commitment to staying in past these 15 states.
Yes, that's true.
As she had to just getting to today.
As the Trump campaign targets March 12th or 19th for presumptive status, when he would mathematically have this in the bag, it still could be mathematically impossible for her to become the nominee tomorrow. And the candidate in waiting idea is starting to wear a little bit thin as Donald Trump scores additional legal victories here. And it looks like we may not have a Jack Smith trial even before this election.
Yeah, you have to get an immunity decision from the Supreme Court first. Of course, the Supreme Court already yesterday did weigh in on another Trump-related matter that factors in today because he is on the ballot in Colorado. despite the Supreme Court there initially saying because of the 14th Amendment he could not be. So voters there and across 14 other states could have the chance to vote for him. And of course, we'll continue to have that covered for you right here on Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
On to the great state of Texas now, Kaylee Lines, where the race to run against, have the opportunity to run against Senator Ted Cruz is something that we're watching among a couple of down ballot races that actually make this super interesting. Of course, Texas is special politically for so many reasons, with the border debate, and it's a state that Donald Trump knows pretty darn well. I think this could be, based on polling, a pretty easy race for him. It's the other ones we're looking at.
Yeah, when you think about the presidential contest, there's 161 delegates, I believe, up for grabs in the state of Texas. Texas and California together, the two biggest ones you could take from a presidential standpoint this evening. But there's a lot else that should be watched in the state of Texas.
This will be part of the later storyline tonight.
Absolutely. States across the board, surely, but of course Texas is, as Joe says, a very big one. Everything is bigger there. So they say. Julie Fine probably doesn't say that, since she's actually in Texas. She is our Texas bureau chief, and she is joining us now. So Julie, if you had to pick a race down ballot, which one is the one to watch this week? Is it the race to run against Ted Cruz, as Joe mentioned?
I think it's the Ted Cruz race. The reason is because Representative Colin Allred, he's a Democrat, seems to be the front runner in this. He's raised more money than Senator Cruz, which, by the way, that happened also when Beto O'Rourke ran against Senator Cruz as well. But that is definitely the race to watch. The question is, if he can get 50% of the vote. State Senator Roland Gutierrez is also in the primary, as are several others. But what's interesting about State Senator Roland Gutierrez is he actually made a name for himself after the mass horrible shooting in Uvalde. That is the district he represents. So he was frequently doing a lot of media. So people in the state know him very well. But again, it's Representative Allred that's really hoping that he can get more than 50% of the vote. If nobody gets more than 50% of a vote, that goes to a runoff. Now, in a race like this, money is going to be extremely important. Obviously, nobody wants to go to a runoff, but that's the race, I think, in Texas that people will pay the most attention to tonight.
Yeah, this ought to be something, that runoff May 28th. If it happens, Julie Fine, happy Super Tuesday. We're looking as well at what could be a pretty tough race for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. What's happening in Houston?
Well, that's what's interesting about that race is Sheila Jackson Lee also recently ran for mayor, and she lost to John Whitmire, who was a longtime state senator. Now she's running against former city councilwoman Amanda Edwards. Amanda Edwards is a fairly well-known name in the area. So Sheila Jackson Lee should have the edge in that race. But again, you start to talk about that runoff. If you go to a runoff, it is a totally different ball game in that race. But this is certainly the hardest race that Sheila Jackson Lee has ever faced. I mean, she has been in Congress for a long time, and now she's coming off that loss for mayor.
And Julie, I would imagine it's fair to say that the border issue primarily in all of these different contests is the one that's going to weigh most heavily on Texan primary voters as they head to the polls today.
It is. It's a very big issue here in Texas. But what's interesting now is how Democrats handle it. Republicans in Texas have been talking about the border and immigration for some time. So have Democrats, but in a different way. So now it's a question of how the Democrats handle it. Do they basically say, okay, there was a bill and Democrats were ready to pass that? And do they try to flip the script? So it'll be interesting to see how Democrats come back in an issue that's so important in the state of Texas.
I've got to be honest, Julie, you know, we heard Tom Suozzi harness that issue, speak to that well. People seem to be listening in New York 3, at least enough for him to win that contest, and he'll have a chance to do it again in November. But I just wonder if voters across the country are paying close enough attention to get the nuances of all of this and have a sense that Donald Trump was involved, that Republicans didn't want the deal. This is getting pretty deep for most people, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure everybody follows politics the way that the three of us do. So you have to think about. I mean, they just don't, right? Some people, you know, follow it every night. They're watching the news. Some people, you know, in states are watching the local news every night. I mean, they're watching something very different. So it will be interesting to see how that goes. Another thing to pay attention to is Donald Trump, obviously the front runner here to win the Republican nomination. Here in 2016, he actually did not win, and that's because Senator Ted Cruz was running for president.
Good reminder from Julie Fine, our Texas bureau chief. Thank you so much. And of course, Julie will be with us later on this evening as we bring you special coverage on this Super Tuesday. It's 8 to 9 p.m. on Bloomberg Radio and YouTube, and then television gets added to that picture, 9 to 11 p.m.
Yep, we're in for the long haul today, and glad that you're a part of it here on Bloomberg Radio and TV as we prepare to hand the baton to New York. Now it's almost time for Bloomberg Business Week. Carol is back with us today. Carol Masser, Tim Stenevec holding forth from World Headquarters in New York. You ready for some election results, Carol?
Yes, and I just want to weigh in. I think the two of us do that. Nobody follows politics like the two of you do. You guys are just so in it.
That's gotta be for the
I'm
best.
thinking like REM sleep and dreams. It's all politics.
Especially on Super Tuesday and a week like this
Exactly.
with the State of the Union on Thursday. I mean, does it get any busier than this for you guys?
I have had, to Carol's point, a number of work-related interview dreams in the last few days. So
All I can say is wait for the conventions. Just wait for the conventions. There's always more.
Only starting,
In
guys.
other words, Joe and Kaylee are
You're right.
saying, send help. We'll send help. Don't worry.
That's right. Send the cavalry. We'll be here for the duration.
Well, we'll be listening.
What do you have coming up, Carol?
Yeah, listen, we're going to take a look at kind of some of the concerns about the tech run-up, some of those big mega cap tech names. Our own Gina Martin Adams weighing in, and she's saying, right, Tim, equity valuations? Not so bad.
Okay, so maybe not compare it to a tech bubble 2.0. Also, one of the most read on the Bloomberg terminal today about the woes facing New York Community Bank. We're going to be joined by Max Abelson as well.
Fantastic. Kaylee, I'll meet you at Balance of Power, the late edition, at 5 p.m. Washington time, and we'll do that other stuff later on, too. Bloomberg Business Week starts right now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, live on Bloomberg Radio and on TV, on YouTube, and, of course, on Bloomberg Originals. It is Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. Let's get to the setup, because if you take a look at the markets, it does feel like mega-cap tech stocks in a big way, Tim, kind of weighing on the trade today.
Yeah, the question is it just a breather or is it part of a bigger trend line? That's certainly top of mind for us. And for all of you concerned about potentially a tech bubble 2.0, we're going to dive into why that might not be the case with Gina Martin Adams in just a few minutes.
Yeah, looking forward to what she has to say about that. Meantime, one tech giant that is being taken to task by investors, Apple, as iPhone woes kind of seem to be deepening when it comes to China. So we're going to break it down, what you need to know about their exposure there.
Well, speaking of woes, New York Community Bank, we're going to be diving into the challenges the company is facing and also what happened over the last few years to get the company where it is. It's the most read story on the Bloomberg terminal and today's big take.
Yeah, it didn't just happen overnight. And in our one more thing, welcome to Target Circle 360. You got Target kind of late to the party, but it's joining what folks like Walmart and Amazon do. They're going after them, so we're going to dig into that in just a moment.
It's not called Target Plus or Target Prime.
No, it isn't. Target Circle 360.
Right.
All right, first up, let's get a check on the day's trade and also your top business stories. Here's Charlie Feller.
Hi, thank you very much. Right now, we are at the low of the day on the S&P 500 index. Stocks selling off. S&P right to the numbers, down 59 now at 5,075. A drop of 1.1%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average lower now by 378, down 1%. NASDAQ down 301 points, down 1.9%. Again, lows of the session on NASDAQ. 10-year at 4.13% with a 2-year 4.55%. Spot gold today up 0.8%. 21.31 the ounce on gold. A retreat for crude down 1.1%, 77.84 a barrel. And Bitcoin, big story there, was trading above $69,000 today. Bitcoin now retreating by 4.9%, 64,225 on Bitcoin. Stocks under pressure as a trio of tech heavyweights slipped. Traders wading through mixed economic data in the run-up to Jay Powell's testimony tomorrow. And right now, Apple shares trading lower by 2.9%. An independent research firm said Apple's iPhone sales in China fell by a surprising 24% over the first 6 weeks of the year. Again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 56, down 1.1%, 10-year 4.13%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. As Charlie just mentioned, the overall market trade, we're seeing tech really taking it the worst, if you will, on a percentage basis. The NASDAQ down about 1.8%. But if you look at some of the big mega cap tech names, Tim, if you look at Apple, it's down. AMD is down. Tesla too. Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Netflix, and Alphabet all losing in today's session, and some by a lot, outpacing the overall index.
Yeah, certainly Apple and Tesla come to mind when you say that. Equities losing traction after a rally that has spurred concern about sky-high valuations, especially when it comes to these mega caps that Carol was just talking about, leaving the group vulnerable to big moves in the face of bad news.
And yet, as Gina Martin Adams, Bloomberg Intelligence Director of Equity Research, writes in a note today, the largest 5 equities in the S&P 500 today trade at less than half the multiples of the 4 horsemen. She talks about Intel, Cisco, Microsoft, and Dell did back in March of 2000. Gina joins us from New Jersey. Gina, I feel like it's like a perfect day to talk to you. First of all, feels like a fair amount of guests come on, though, and they continue to say, hey, the tech run-up, it feels very like a bubble, like the bubble back in 99 and 2000. Not a fair comparison?
Well, I mean, first of all, Carol, if I had a nickel for everybody that told me we were in a tech bubble over the course of the last 10 years, I would be an incredibly wealthy woman. I do think that this is, as a reflection of what we went through in the 2000 crisis and then again in the great financial crisis, the preeminent emotion on the part of the investor base is generally fear. Fear of another bubble developing, fear of another crash emerging. And so as a result, we naturally question every rally in stocks. We naturally question every sign of optimism that emerges in the market. But we have statistical tools for this reason. Our statistical analysis of the market would suggest that the pulse of the market right now is nothing like that of the 1999-2000 bubble peak when everyone wanted to own stocks. You generally saw all stocks rising and rising at an exponentially strong pace. Very different than today, where certainly some stocks are rising and optimism has emerged in those stocks, but you're also seeing cash flow growth, you're seeing sales growth, you're seeing earnings growth. It's just very different today than it was in the first tech bubble. But I do think that simply the fact that everyone's questioning it by default makes it not a bubble. I mean, I think if you think about sentiment back in the late 1990s, everyone wanted to own stocks and they owned them really without questioning valuations, without questioning earnings. So it's very healthy that we're certainly questioning and we're trying to be pretty conscientious toward the investment landscape. But by definition, that is not necessarily a bubble condition.
Okay, Gina, what about when it comes outside of the equity market in ways that you can track sentiment in other ways? And I'm specifically talking about Bitcoin here, hitting a new record high today, 2 years after its last record. With that comes other cryptocurrencies, these so-called meme coins. I'm going to mention these again. I got a lot of flack online yesterday. Don't do it. Pepe, the frog-themed coin, and Dog with Hat have been racking up fresh highs almost daily. This according to data tracker CoinGecko. Does that to you does not have signs of froth?
Well, that's not the equity market, Tim, but nonetheless.
But does it say something about overall sentiment?
Crypto could certainly be a sign of definitely some optimism with respect to crypto industries, some speculative activity with respect to crypto, and you could see feed through to the equity market ultimately. But really what I do is analyze the equity market. And when I analyze the equity market, I'm looking at the stocks of the biggest companies predominantly. And when I look at the stocks of the biggest companies, valuations look nothing like those of the late 1990s. And that's the sum total of the note. I think that there are a lot of anecdotes out there in the market at any given point in time. And certainly what's happening in crypto could ultimately feed through to other asset classes. But when I'm looking at the broad equity market, I do not see the conditions that existed in the late 1990s bubble.
All right, and where we always like to go is earnings. And Bloomberg also has a story out today about how U.S. companies are topping earnings estimates this quarterly reporting season with technology, and consumer staple sectors among the biggest winners. I mean, probably no surprise to you. We've talked about it in terms we've seen the outperformance. This goes to your argument, right, about the fundamental performance we've seen among some of these tech names and some of the big, mega cap names, if you will, in particular.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to note that it's not just a rally that's driven by the mega cap stocks. I do think that when you look at the year-to-date performance, you actually have significant outperformance that has emerged for financials and industrials as well. For some reason, we're not talking about this. But nonetheless, it's not just tech and communication stocks that are outperforming the S&P 500. Financials and industrials are too. You also have a pretty significant breakout that has emerged in healthcare. And all of this is on the heels of an earnings season that was not just about tech stocks. It was about more than 75% of companies beat expectations. The broad S&P 500 posted an 8% year-over-year earnings growth pace. Even ex-tech, we got more confirmation that the earnings trough was 2 quarters ago, and more companies producing earnings growth quarter after quarter for the last 2 quarters does prove that there's some degree of earnings breadth that has emerged on the index. I know that we're all completely captivated by what's going on in tech and what's going on with AI, but there's a lot more underneath the surface of what's happening in the S&P 500, and I think earnings prove that case.
Gina, you always make the point, the market isn't the economy isn't the market. So tell me that enthusiasm that we're seeing in terms of earnings and the broadening out in terms of the gains, does that seem optimistic to you or not necessarily a sign that the economy is going to continue with momentum?
Yeah, I think you can have periods in time in which corporate profits, start to drive very different conditions than those that exist in the economy. And I do think we're at that point in time. Certainly, corporate profits had a much greater recession then emerged in the economy in 2022 and 2023. We're starting to see corporate profits recover in 2024. There may be some detachment from the economy, which is still does appear to be kind of stuck. And maybe what's happening in corporate profits is more being driven by inflation conditions, rationalization and spending plans, sort of companies really pushing the levers on operating margin gains and net income gains to drive earnings growth than they are really leveraging any kind of improvement in the broader economy to really drive earnings growth. What ultimately drives stocks, though, is profits, and I think we need to respect that. You know, the derivation of a stock's value is really about future cash flow growth of the company. And as long as cash flow growth is improving, that's generally what's going to drive stock prices, irrespective of what's going on in the economy.
Gina, what derails the thesis? What derails the narrative here? Like, what should we be keeping an eye on? What are you and the team keeping an eye on that could cause things to move in a different direction?
Yeah, so I think that one material threat to the general bull market that has been in place since the late 2022 lows is what's happening in the small cap index. So we're watching small caps really carefully. A positive condition has emerged in the small cap index over the last 3 months that also seems to have gone somewhat unnoticed, and that is, small caps broke out and then retested breakout points for the first time in this cycle. Small caps found some support at their 50-day moving average, have actually found support on the breakout and retest. So from a technical perspective, the small cap chart is incredibly important. We want to see a breakout there to emerge to really improve broader risk tolerance, improve breadth, sort of put some of these risks at bay to the broader equity market breakout. The other thing that I'm watching certainly is margins and sales growth. I think that we have had a remarkable recovery in the earnings stream, largely driven by margin stabilization and inflation disinflating prices, as well as margin improvement.
Right.
And if we can get some top line stability to emerge on the index beyond tech and communications, I think that can go a long way to improving the condition as well. But if it doesn't, that could certainly create a turnaround that is not necessarily friendly for stocks.
All right, something smart to keep on our radar. Always smart. Gina Martin-Adams, Bloomberg Intelligence Director of Equity Research, joining us from New Jersey. We started, though, talking about the mega cap tech names, and one in particular, Tim, is on our radar. Apple. Shares still down about 2.9% today.
Yeah, this follows independent research from Counterpoint Research, noting that Apple's iPhone sales in China fell by a surprising 24% over the first 6 weeks of the year, with the iPhone slipping to 4th place in China in the first weeks of 2024. New Street Research's head of technology infrastructure, Pierre Ferragu, weighing in on China's struggles earlier on Bloomberg Surveillance.
If you look at Apple, really, it's a competition. It's mostly a competition issue. So Huawei is back in China. They were not able to do phones for quite a while because they couldn't access chips manufactured at TSMC anymore. Now they figured out a way to do chips domestically on mainland China. They are back, and Chinese consumers like to buy Huawei phones.
That was New Street Research's head of technology infrastructure, Pierre Ferragu, earlier on Bloomberg Surveillance.
All right, we said Apple down about 3% today, down 7 out of the past 8 sessions for a loss of about 8% in that time frame. Let's get to it. More on the Apple stock and the company gloom or apparent doom. With us is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Technology Analyst Anurag Rana, joining us from our Chicago bureau. Anurag, let's talk about Apple. Concerns about iPhone sales in China falling by a surprising 24% over the first 6 weeks of this year. This is according to one report. Put it in perspective for us. Should we be concerned?
Oh, yeah. This has been the big concern for almost over, now probably close to 12 months. And it doesn't look like there's any, news or relief at this point. China consumer weakness and, the Huawei phone, which got its first upgrade after many years. Those are the two factors that are, having people not choose Apple at this point. And again, this is the biggest growth driver for Apple in the near term is China and other emerging markets. And if China, catches a cold, then it's going to be a problem for Apple for at least this year and perhaps even next year.
Well, Greater China accounting for 19% of Apple's revenue in fiscal year 2023, Anurag. How does Apple turn itself around here? How does it improve this cold, that, as you call it?
I think it's going to take some time unless they come up with some new AI features by summer that can help drive this, I would say, weak iPhone sales refresh cycle. what has happened over the last 3-4 years is the iPhone, being such a sturdy product, has seen its life elongate, which means before the refresh cycle was about 3.6 years. If it gets extended by 4 years, then you're going to sell less new phones every year compared to the last few years, and that's what's really happening. And the second thing is, each of these phones are getting more and more expensive, so people are keeping them at a longer period of time. In order to refresh that, or in order to change that, you need to come up with new features, and that's not been the case, although I would say that the 15 does have a much better camera than anything else out there. But I think AI could be something that can jumpstart that. But we are so far away from them even showcasing what they can do, let alone hoping that that's going to drive more iPhone sales.
So is an AI generative or generative AI, I should say, iPhone, is that the answer? And what is this? I know Samsung's already got something out and seems to be getting a lot of attention, but is that it?
It's basically that your operating system itself, the default system on the phone, has a lot of those features for which you're using applications right now. And if Apple's able to pull some of those things out, people with older hardware, less memory, the battery running out, not a faster processor, will basically say, well, if I want some of these features, I'm going to go out and upgrade my phone. So that's really what the driving factor is. But those features need to be, pretty damn good in order for somebody to go out and buy a new phone.
I mean, what kind of features are we talking about here? Because it seems to be a simple fix would be, offering consumers something that they do repeatedly on their phones. Like getting off the subway and realizing, okay, I need a city bike somewhere. This is a New York example. But why doesn't Apple just have the technology to tell me, okay, the closest electric city bike is at this station, which is this far away? Like, I do this every day on my commute home.
Their data set's got to be incredible.
It's got to be
on all of
incredible.
us.
It seems like an easy lift.
That is an easy lift in principle. But remember, Apple was, wants to do a lot of other things also. And that's why, we were happy that they got rid of that car project. We think it was not a smart idea. And now they're refocusing all their attention on Gen AI. That's good because at the end of the day, you can experiment all you want, but the phone is really your livelihood. And that's where the attention needs to be. Focus on that, make it develop better than faster than anything else. And, the user will follow.
This is all about the ecosystem, the Apple ecosystem. Everything's got to feed it, right, Anurag?
Yep, absolutely. And, imagine that, we say that, iPhone's only 52% of sales. But if I were to add the headphones and the watch and other things, the Apple ecosystem is far bigger than that. And not to forget all the services, because those are double-digit growth numbers. And that's where, a lot of the monetization can happen too. And it's a much higher margin business. So you got to go protect your ecosystem. Otherwise, you're going to be in this 2 to 5% growth for many years to come.
All right, good stuff. As always, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Technology Analyst Anurag Rana with the latest on Apple. Shares down about 2.8%, off their lows, but still down a lot.
One thing I talk about all the time is the iOS ecosystem. It's not as strong in China because of the over-the-top apps, the payment apps, the all-in-one apps that people use to communicate. It's not like iMessage here.
It's not like something we have embraced, but it's definitely something you see in China in a big way.
As much as Facebook has wanted us to embrace it.
Yeah, exactly.
For us to embrace
Apple shares, by the way, they have been down. They're down almost 8% since about February 22nd. So really down to the downside. Hey, coming up, the warnings, the regulators, and the laws that have all played a big part in the fall of New York Community Bancorp. That story next.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We have got U.S. stocks trading lower right now with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all declining. S&P right now at 5,077, drop now of 53 points, down 1%. Dow Industrials down 354 points, lower by 0.9%. The NASDAQ Composite Index also declining, down 291 now. That is a drop of 1.8%. S&P, by the way, trading at just about the lows of the day. 10-year yield, 4.13%, with a 2-year right now, 4.54%. Spot gold up $19 the ounce, up 0.9%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6%, 78.29 a barrel. And Bitcoin, big story today, now falling by 6.3%. A Bitcoin at 63,197. Bitcoin did hit a record of just above 69,000 earlier in the session. The investor group seeking to acquire Macy's is against the retailer's plans to close 150 stores. That's according to ArcHouse managing partner Gabrielle Kahani, who was interviewed earlier today on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Macy's shares right now, they are trading lower. We've got Macy's down by about 0.3%. Again, recapping, stocks are lower. S&P down 52, decline now of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday. Well, shares of troubled New York Community Bank are rallying today after a 2-day rout that wiped 43% off the stock after a pair of rating downgrades threatened to boost the beleaguered bank's borrowing costs. We've been watching this name, watching the share price for a while now, Tim.
Yeah, the stock was a relative winner among regional banks last year, but it's lost more than 2/3 of its value so far this year. That slump began after the bank's earnings report back in January, which included a steep cut to the dividend and higher provisions for loan losses.
And the tale continues to unfold. And as Bloomberg's Max Abelson reports in one of our most read stories on the Bloomberg, he gets into how the bank got to where it is today. It's a tale of missed signs, new laws, and changing regulators. The story, by the way, also today's Bloomberg Big Take, meaning it's one of the stories our editorial team deemed a must-read for the investing community. He is here with us and joins us with more. He's Bloomberg News finance reporter, and he's here in studio. Killer's Day, 2 days in a row, the Bloomberg Big Take. Explain, Max, how a bank described as a Picasso just a few years ago, which is how you kick off this story, by its then CEO, is now among the troubled regional lenders under vigilant watch by investors.
Yeah, it's been quite a roller coaster. When he said that, and that was the then head of NYCB, a guy named Tom Kanjemi. He was holding a town hall, and they were riding high. I don't know if you remember this, but there were many years, basically a decade, when banks really wanted to merge with each other, but it just kind of wasn't happening.
Right.
And then finally, sort of one after another, mergers started breaking through, and NYCB bought this bank called Flagstar, and he was addressing Flagstar's employees. And he said, I look at this as a blank page, and folks, we're going to paint a Picasso together. And, in a way, he was right, because what has happened is very big and it's very messy. The bank got even bigger than he thought it would at that moment. Not only did New York Community Bank get big by buying Flagstar, I don't know if you remember this, it bought part of Signature after it failed.
Right.
And Carol, one thing that happens once you cross a certain line in the United States is you sort of invite in extra regulation. And
bigger isn't always better.
Bigger isn't necessarily better. Now, if you get so big that the extra regulation is kind of worth it because you not only jump over the line, but you kind of like leap over the line.
Right.
I think that's considered sort of the grail for banks that are merging. In this case, it was not only hit with that kind of extra regulatory attention, but when you look under the hood at New York Community Bank, what you find is a lot of mortgages, and a lot of them are in affordable housing in New York City, and that's a messy story right now.
It's a messy story, but it seems like it's one that is contained to New York, and it's uniquely New York because of New York regulations. Talk to us a little bit about what happened in 2019 and how a seemingly stable bet turned south.
Yep. There was a very long time where I think the business of lending to regulated landlords was seen as, on the one hand, stable, and on the other hand, lucrative, because before these rent regulations came in, what landlords would do is they would spruce up an apartment, and then they would be able to charge people more. And I don't think I can promise that this happened, but I'm pretty sure that happened to me. I think that I was in an apartment that I can't remember the details because I'm old now. I'm almost 40, and when I was like 22, my vague memory is that I moved into a rent-regulated apartment, and then the rents got jacked up when they made changes to it. But I don't want radio listeners to hold me to that.
Hold on, was this the apartment where I met you for the first time nearly 20 years ago?
It might have been.
And our paths didn't cross until 15 years later.
Listeners on Radioland should know that these two people, we hung a heap. This guy came over to my apartment. Now I didn't know who he was at a party. But kidding aside, I want to quickly say that what happened in 2019 is that the rules that govern what happens in Manhattan apartments really changed. And no longer could landlords jack up the rents or even get rid of rent regulations entirely. Right. And that put pressure not just on landlords, but it put pressure on the banks that lend to them, especially when there's a lot of leverage involved.
It's so interesting. I feel like if you're in New York, everybody's got a story about owning or living in a rent-stabilized apartment and what you will do to hold on to it, and then landlords who try to do everything to kind of get you to move along. In doing this story, is there a moment in time where you think, wow, this was a big miss by the regulators or by the leaders who were overseeing this growing entity? Is there a moment in time where it just seems like, wow, this was its undoing? Or does it sound like it's a sum of parts of just, several things that just kind of chipped away at the future of this company?
You're too a kind of a colleague to twist my arm, but if you were to twist my arm, Carol Massar, I would refer to an interview I did with folks at the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, which is a nonprofit that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And they wrote a letter to the OCC, and they said, "Excuse me, but we have a question. How is it